Hello and welcome back to our coverage here on our extended programme Tour Plus of this year's Tour de France, and this is the final weekend of the race, but it's not an easy one for the riders at all. They're coming away from Belfort today, a massive ride, 256.5 kilometres to here in Troyes. And I wonder if the sprinter Eric Zabel can finally do that green jersey justice and get himself a stage win. He hasn't won a stage of the Tour de France since 1997. But you know, everyone is still talking about that great time trial yesterday of Lance Armstrong. He really did prove to us then he was the strongest man in this year's Tour. It brought together two of the world's best in a head-to-head, which to Armstrong was a point of honour, and to Ulrich a chance to show his fans just how good he really was. As the kilometres ticked away, the two champions were split by never more than 30 seconds. But it was Armstrong who was on the ride of his life. We are watching probably the second fastest time trial in the history of the Tour de France. Armstrong sprinting the long straight here in Mulhouse. This will confirm him as winner of the Tour de France as well, and as winner of a stage of the time trial this year. Armstrong rocks and rolls his way home here now as he comes up to the line. His time is 1:5:01. He wins the time trial, and look at the speed, 53.9 kilometres an hour. That is the second fastest time trial ever seen.
Like last year, I thought it was important that the yellow jersey do a good ride, do a respectable ride, and show the, maybe show the race and show the world that he is the strongest man.
And there's no longer any doubt as to the winner in Paris tomorrow. Lance Armstrong leads Jan Ullrich by 6 minutes 2 seconds, and Yoshiba Bolocki holds on to third, 30 seconds ahead of teammate and now best Frenchman Christophe Moreau. David Miller, who finished 7th in the time trial yesterday, is 63rd and looking forward to Paris. The rollout today from Belfort beneath a clear sky and no serious mountains on the long road to Troyes. In fact, Paul, it looks a really nice day.
Excellent racing conditions, Phil. Sunny all the way here to Troyes. 15 to 20 kilometres an hour winds, though. That might make it difficult on the run-in. And a high temperature at 27 degrees Celsius.
Thanks, Paul. One man hoping to lead the Tour with a win in these next 2 days is the Aussie sprinter Robbie McEwen. And here he is talking to us on the rollout this morning.
Here we are on the second last day. Beautiful weather, summer's finally arrived in France. 2 days and 400k to go. Today's 255 kilometres. Yeah, probably another breakaway. They haven't started yet, we're already gone through kilometre 0, but there's been no attacks yet. So maybe there's a little bit of sense coming into the bunch, but probably won't be long. I guess tomorrow is going to be the only sprint, so you're going to have to wait until then. See you then.
Good on you, Robbie. This is the Lanterne Rouge of the Tour de France now, Olivier Perraudot. He's 3 hours 46 minutes behind Lance Armstrong, so I don't think he'll bother attacking him today. At the first sprint of a long day at Fontaine-lez-Luxembourg, after 52 kilometres, Robbie McEwen was warming up for Paris perhaps, beating Jackie Durand and Eric Decker. Then came a crash 10 kilometres later, and out of the Tour, Michael Bogart of Holland and the Rabobank team. Bleeding, he reluctantly went into the ambulance today, and this will be the first time in 5 tours that he will not have reached Paris. That really is bad luck. These 3 riders are the remnants of a 4-man breakaway, in fact. Roman Weinstein of Vino Calderola was up here with them. He decided it wasn't going to work, so he fell back. The breakaway having got away, an attack by Francois Simon at 136 kilometres into the race. And now the latest gap we've got is just under 3 minutes. And when Francois got away, he was first over the top of the Côte de Chaumont, chased by Gwiazdowski and Eno. And then that's the way it stayed over the next climb, the Col d'Allon, where Eno won there, Gwiazdowski and Simon, and they're staying pretty much together now. This is a presentation here.
Well, this is around about 184 kilometres covered. This will be the town, I presume, where General de Gaulle passed out his final years, and it's the town of Colombey. And in fact, the Tour de France once stopped here back in 1969.
Yes, and the famous meeting of Charles de Gaulle in 1960, when he came down to the end of the garden and shook hands with the leader of the Tour de France, Gaston Nencini. And he said to him then, as the Tour was nearing its end, "You've gained enough time to be the winner in Paris," and indeed he was. Jean-Marie Leblanc in the centre there, the director of the Tour de France, and twice there he is, Twice a rider in this race. He was never an outstanding cyclist, but he was certainly turned out to be an extremely competent organiser. Rode for the old Bic professional team. Looking out across the beautiful countryside now as it bounds down here. We're riding through a number of the departments of France today, from Belfort, which is in the department of Haute-Saône, which is the famous river, and then it goes on right through the Vosges, back into the Haute-Marne, and then finally into the department of the Aube. And this is where Francois Simon, who's riding here in the Bonjour colours, he comes from there, and that's why he's on the attack today.
This is the monument to General de Gaulle, the man who led France and was president for many years, and he in fact was a great supporter of the sport of cycling, as many of the French presidents have been in the past. The last president to actually visit the Tour de France and been very visual in his support of the Tour is actually Jacques Chirac.
Yes, a number of prime ministers and presidents of France have been on the Tour de France. Chirac was a great supporter of this event, and the race is finished on the Champs-Élysées outside of the Élysée Palace. It's been finishing there since 1975 now, and it's always finished in Paris, in fact, since its history began in 1903. But to finish on the actual famous road of the Champs-Élysées is very special to the Tour, and I don't think it'll ever choose to finish anywhere else again. Back up with the three front runners now as they continue to course their way hopefully towards Troyes without being interfered with by anybody else. In the Crédit Agricole colours and the green shorts here, Sébastien Hinault, famous name but no relation to Bernard Hinault, who won the Tour de France 5 times. Francois Simon knows these roads as well as anybody because he lives in this region. He's on the front in the blue. And Gregory Gwiazdowski from La Française des Jeux at the back here. He's won himself a classic, and that really was a surprise at the time, and he hasn't done much since, but he is a strong bike rider.
Certainly is a very good bike rider. The man with the biggest name, really the biggest ticket on his shoulders, is the man in the dark blue jersey there, Francois Simon, Jérôme Simon. He's the youngest of 4 cycling brothers, and I raced with 2 of them, Jérôme and Régis, both winners of a stage of the Tour de France, as was the elder brother Pascal. He won the stage into Orcières-les-Merlettes, but he also was made more famous by the fact that he wore the yellow jersey and actually had to abandon because of a broken shoulder blade.
Yes, that was a very sad occasion, and I remember that only too well. He suffered on for a long time with that pain until he got to the mountains, and he certainly couldn't climb the mountains with a problem like that. The American US Postal Services team, the only team of 20, bringing all 9 riders towards Paris. And in the red top jersey, their champion of Luxembourg, Joaquin Benoit Joachim, has Lance Armstrong on the right here, the leader, and what a leader of the Tour now, over 6 minutes advantage over the second rider. So he isn't going to worry too much about the boys up front. And the gap, if anything, has come down slightly now, Paul.
Well, they've got control of this breakaway group right here. You know, those 3 riders in front, Phil, have still got an awful long way to go. Around about 45 miles of racing to the finish. And I get the feeling 1 or 2 of the teams today would like to try and pull them back into the fold. Obviously, the Farm Frites team from Holland, they think Robbie McEwen's got a great chance of taking out victory. And in fact, his wife has made the transfer down here to watch the finish of this stage. And I wonder if that is an omen for the little Australian sprinter. But certainly one man chasing the stage victory is the man who leads the King of the Sprints competition, the green jersey competition. He's going to take that title out for the 5th year in succession. Eric Zabel, he got so close a couple of days ago in Lausanne, and this is a very tough stage and it might suit him, but maybe he'll try and hold something back to try and win the final stage on the Champs-Élysées.
He's certainly looking that way. There's his team all around him, and they're the boys in the pink tops of Telecom. They've had 2 glorious days with the race passing through Germany because of the support that the Telecom team have had in Germany. Over the 2 days of racing from Switzerland into Germany and back into France, there were 2 million spectators on the roadside, and they really have been entertained by these bike riders. Lance Armstrong, there he is, now riding coolly towards Paris, having won a stage now, the time trial, and looking like he's going to finish up with a victory margin of over 6 minutes over Ulrich. In fact, there's only 27 riders of the 128 still in who are within 1 hour of Lance Armstrong overall, which gives you some idea of how strong he has been this year.
I think yesterday's time trial result as well just showed exactly how strong the difference was between Lance Armstrong and Jan Ullrich and the rest of the field. Those two riders fairly close together in that time trial, but Christophe Moreau, who put in a good performance as well, Phil, losing more than 2 minutes. It gives you an idea just how much more superiority Armstrong and Ullrich have in the time trial.
Oh, absolutely. And they're going to come head to head in the Olympic Games, where they're also going to meet up with Stuart O'Grady, who was in this tour early on and went out with a broken collarbone. He's getting himself back in shape now for the Olympic Games time trial, so he'll see a lot more of the Tour de France boys when they go to Sydney in September. All of the US Postal boys here looking very cool. Paul Sheeran remarking to me this morning that he was with the team at their hotel last night and he thought they all looked very relaxed and very fresh and not really suffering at all.
I think they're suffering, but they are doing well and recovering exceptionally well. An interesting thing that I did notice, that the team has a huge entourage, and they're probably the first team that I can think of who've had on the whole of the Tour de France a chiropractor, and the chiropractor looks after every bike rider each night. Although they do have 4 masseurs and 4 mechanics, the chiropractor goes out and makes sure that all of these guys in a nice alignment, and make sure that if they do get involved in any crashes, he keeps them pretty straight.
Number 2 there's Frankie Andreu, selected during the Tour de France for the short list for the Sydney Olympic Games for the USA. That'll be named in the early days of August, and I'm sure, judging by the way he's been riding here, then one hopes he'll make the team for Sydney as well.
Well, the United States have to pick 5 riders for that team. 5 riders will represent the US for the Olympics in Sydney. One man has already got a guaranteed place, and that's Antonio de la Cruz. He won one of the qualifying events in the United States, and I'm pretty sure that the second man who is almost certain to qualify is going to be Lance Armstrong. But the next 3 places are going to be pretty difficult to choose, because there's some good performances being posted here at the Tour de France by most of the Americans, and I would be surprised if Freddie Rodriguez didn't make it into the team, because although he doesn't ride on the same team as Lance Armstrong, he certainly has proved to be a very good sprinter, and he's going to complete his first Tour de France this year.
With credibility, and you know, being such a good sprinter, he could well take on Robin McEwen and Eric Zabel either today or tomorrow, and maybe even get his first stage win. This is the breakaway for the first time since they escaped. It's now over 3 minutes for Eno Gwiazdowski and Francois Simon, the youngest of the 4 famous cycling brothers. He's the only one left racing as we course our way in towards his home department of the Aube.
Interestingly enough, he's the only one of the 3 brothers that hasn't won a stage, but then on the other hand, he's the only one of the 3 brothers who has been the French national champion, a title which he took last year, and he was hoping to try and get himself that stage victory, and it looked very much as if he might have gotten it on one of the stages of the Tour de France last year, Phil, but he was outwitted on the final climb by David Echavarria, one of the few riders from the Once squad who had to abandon this year, which is a bit of a surprise because he took out 2 stage victories last year. The 3 leaders now in the town where General de Gaulle passed out his final days after he retired as the President of France, and strangely enough, there were 1 or 2 American flags creeping into the fold today.
Not surprisingly, because they're about to have a weekend of American domination of the Tour de France, as they did last year. Nobody's going to attack Lance Armstrong anymore in this year's race. No point now, a gap of 6 minutes can't be recuperated. Lance will watch all of the riders nearest to him, Jan Ullrich, Yoshiba Berlocchi, Christophe Moreau and Roberto Heras. And after those boys, well, it's more than 12 minutes back to the next man, so he needn't watch too many anymore. Massive crowds again to the villages of France. Anything the Germans can do, the French can match, it seems, here, because this is a big turnout on what is a beautiful day. The wind is fairly strong, and it's coming slightly cross to the riders throughout the way. We're gently rising north of the westerly direction up towards Troyes, and when we get to the finish, we're about 170 kilometres away from Paris itself, and those kilometres done in the luxury of a train.
In fact, a pretty special train as well, because in the past the riders have always had the transfer done on the TGV, the Grande Vitesse, the French train that speeds along at 180 miles an hour. Well, they won't be doing that tomorrow, because for the first time, in fact, the Tour de France is going to take the Orient Express to take the bike riders up to Paris, and that's a pretty cool experience, I would say, for most of these guys, because I would say it has to be the most famous train in the world.
Yes, it is, but I hope they don't start dishing out the champagne before the last stage of the Tour de France on the Orient Express. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, I'm sure, will be on board.
Yes, but you might not recognize him because he usually travels disguised when he travels on that.
So the sky is a little bit of cloud up there now. In fact, it's gone a little bit overcast towards the finishing line, but it's still very warm. These three riders, I think if they're going to stay away, because we're looking here at still just inside 70 kilometers to go, they're going to need, I think, quite a lead, maybe 4 to 5 minutes to survive.
Well, you can see the main field now about to pass under the shadow of that monument to the General de Gaulle. And still it's the United States Postal Service team on the front. These guys actually said to me last night, Phil, they said, you know, we're ready to work again if we need to. And they were just bearing in mind that there was always the possibility of a last attack coming from Jan Ullrich. And in fact, Ullrich was involved in one of the earlier skirmishes of the day when a group of about 16 or 17 riders got off the front of the bunch. But I think he decided that actually going back to the main field was the most sensible decision for him, because he was quite happy, I think, now to finish this Tour de France in second place. And he reckoned that a long raid on the penultimate stage would probably come to nothing.
Well, he was reasonably pleased with his ride yesterday in the title. I'd say very pleased, in fact. Only Armstrong beat him by 25 seconds. But with the time checks as they were, once Armstrong got his lead, they both rode the course at the same speed. He never improved on the time gap all the way to the finish. Ullrich was very, very pleased, but he had one regret, and that was he couldn't show all the fans who'd come out to see him winning the stage of the Tour. But he came up against a guy just that little bit quicker than him, and certainly with the fastest time trial over that distance ever ridden in a Tour de France, I think Armstrong left his message pretty clearly written on the road.
Armstrong psychologically really wanted to go out and win that time trial, because he actually said to me last night, Phil, that if he hadn't won the time trial, people would have asked questions about his superiority, because he was left behind on the Col de Jouplan by Jan Ullrich. And he felt that if he was beaten in the final time trial as well, people would always discuss as to whether or not Armstrong was weakening in the final week of the Tour de France and maybe was not a worthy winner. And I think by stamping his authority all over that time trial, he's stopped the tongues wagging.
Well, he's certainly done that, and now he's got the benefit of having all 8 members of his team around him, and none of the other teams can claim that. A lot of the heads of the teams have already gone back home. It's amazing how many leaders have abandoned this year. Alex Zuller, leader of the Banesto team. Michele Bartoli, leader of Mapei. Today we saw Michael Bogert go. He's the leader of Rabobank in that crash. Also gone is Marco Pantani, leader of Mercatoni Uno. Jan Kirsipuu, AG2R. Laurent Dufaux, the leader of Seiko. Sergei Ivanov never even got to start because of that high blood count reading for Farm Frites. Frank Vandenbroek, we never saw him until he was on the train home for Cofidis. Rick Verbruggen, he went out for Lotto. Stefan Erlo, he went out for the Française des Jeux. And it's amazing, Paul, how many race leaders have left the Tour this year.
It is absolutely remarkable. All the big names came to the Tour de France ready to take on Lance Armstrong, including this man at the back here, number 15. That's Jose Maria Jimenez, where I was expecting a big challenge to come from him and from the other Banesto leader, Alex Zuller. Zuller is no longer in this bike race, and certainly nobody can say this year that Lance Armstrong won because none of the other favourites were here. Everyone was here. All of the top challengers in the world took part in this year's Tour de France, and as you say, a lot of them fell by the roadside.
Yeah, and this is a long way today. From the 11 o'clock start local time this morning, they don't really expect them in till about 5:30 if they're on a good time this evening here, as we circumnavigate the town and birthplace of General de Gaulle at Colombey, and the race coursing its way reasonable speed because it's not a very strong wind onto the nose. It's coming across at the minute, and these riders happy to keep the tempo. They're not chasing down these breakaways yet because they get an easier time of it if they leave them out up the road, and at the minute they are still gaining. Last check we got was 3 minutes 30, and that's at 184 kilometers covered, so there's still 70 plus kilometers to go to the finish when that check was taken.
Well, there's the main field now going under the shadow of that incredible monument to de Gaulle, and just a quick glance there of Jackie Durand moving to the front of the field, checking out what the yellow jersey looks like on the shoulders of Lance Armstrong. And in fact, if Armstrong really wanted to knock off the final day of this Tour de France with a bang, why not the possibility of a victory going to George Hincapie, who is a pretty impressive sprinter, who this year at the Tour de France has had to completely dedicate his work in this event to Lance. maybe that would be a nice little present to turn around for and offer him on the last day.
It would be fantastic for George, and he too hoping for a place, I suspect, on the Olympic team as well. Still setting the pace here, Sébastien Hinault for Crédit Agricole. It looks like a little bit of stretching in progress here with Gregory Gradowski. 64 kilometers to go.
Well, this is a pretty long stage, and a very long stage when you bear in mind that it's the penultimate day of the Tour de France. 254 kilometers, but these guys are pretty insistent on trying to build themselves up a large advantage before we get into the final hour of racing, because they know that when they do get closer to the finish, the main field will start to react. Armstrong's US Postal Service team at the moment just riding a steady tempo on the front field. They're not trying to chase this group down, but they're trying to prevent them getting a massive margin.
Roger Leger here, the manager of Crédit Agricole, as he cheers on his man Hinault, having a chat there with Francois Simon. Well, Simon left Roger Leger's side to join a rival professional team this year, but it looks as though they're still pretty good friends. And the Bonjour team are desperate for a stage win. They were a team, one of the French teams that came into the race. A lot of the Italian cycling teams very upset that the French organisers took French teams in at the expense of a team like Lampre, and which would have let in Robbie Hunter, the South African professional. And I think the team has a right to feel a little bit aggrieved, because the Lampre team are having a great season, but of course a lot of pressure from the French nation to make sure they've got a good representation of French teams in the Tour, and sadly that left Lampre out.
Well, it would have been good to see the Lampre squad here, because in fact Jans Verrada has always been one of the major personalities of the Tour de France, especially over the first 10 days or so. A great man to rival the sprints of Mario Cipollini, who as well wasn't present at the Tour de France this year. He had a terrible crash just a couple of weeks before the Tour and wasn't able to start. 3 minutes and 55 seconds is the advantage these three men have, Phil, now over the main field. It is creeping up slowly, but I'm quite certain that later on, as we get closer to the finish, we're going to see the Farm Freaks team come forward. And maybe today, why not the Telecom team? Because this is a great opportunity for Eric Zabel to try and get them another stage victory. Welcome back to Tour Plus and our extended coverage of the penultimate stage of the Tour de France. Today's featured rider is a man we haven't seen an awful lot of in the Tour de France so far, but we might over the next couple of days. The Frenchman Olivier Perradeau. The 27-year-old rides for the Bonjour team of France, a first-time entry in this year's event, and currently he lies 669th in the world. He was born in Chalon. He's 1.62 m and weighs in at 60 kilograms, and he's earned himself the nickname of Nimbus because of his small stature. He's married with a daughter called Emma. He's been a professional since 1998 and so far doesn't have a win to his credit. But this year is his first attempt at the Tour. It didn't start too well either. 173rd in the prologue from 177 riders. But when he rides up and down the Champs-Élysées, everyone will remember that Olivier Perradeau was the Lanterne Rouge, or the last man at the Tour. And certainly there'll be a lot of jokes pointed in his direction.
Well, this is Lignol-le-Château. It's the first town in the department of the Aube. So the boy in the blue here now, Francois Simon, is home, because this is his home training ground now, and he's bringing the Tour de France through towards the finish in Troyes. Big ambition today to get that win, the fourth of the famous family of four, the only one left racing as a top pro. He has worn the King of the Mountains leader's jersey in the Tour de France, the first time he ever rode the Tour. He didn't go on to win that, of course, it was early days, but he's always been an aggressive bike rider.
Great bike rider too, and I think the crowning of his career was last year, getting himself that French national title and being able to ride the Tour de France with that jersey on his shoulders. I think he made a bit of a gamble this winter though, Phil, moving across to the new Bonjour team, because he was much better looked after with the Crédit Agricole team. France trying to build up a new class of professional bike riders with a lot of younger teams coming into the fold, and this new Bonjour team, a bit surprising they made the selection to the Tour de France, because it could have gone to any one of three French teams who are vying for that last position to come in on a wild card.
The one team that also came in on a wild card was the Kelme squad, and they have ridden so well from Spain. They lost only slightly their ground. They're still the leaders of the Tour in the team race. Yesterday, the great rides by Christophe Moreau and Joshiba Balocchi in the time trial brought Festina up into second place ahead of the erstwhile leaders Benesto. but still 13 3/4 minutes behind Kelme. So all of Kelme today, their job was to make sure that nobody got into a breakaway here from Festina and stole a march and maybe the team race. And that's not going to be the case. They're all back in the main field. And so Kelme now are going to have a wonderful occasion for them tomorrow on the Champs-Élysées as they run out the team winners of this tour.
Magnificent Tour de France for them, really. This has been a very aggressive team over the many years we've seen them at the Tour de France, and in fact they've been in the sport of professional cycling for 21 years, the longest sponsor in the sport.
So a mixture of pasture land and vineyards here now in the Aube. Next town is the Bar-sur-Aube, which is the sprint and the last sprint of the day, and that'll leave us 55 kilometres still to ride, but not too far away from it, about 6 kilometres I think for the leaders. A bit further for the chase group here. Last time checked, nearly 4 minutes behind. So they're going to be around about 3 kilometres now on the road behind those 3 leaders.
Still the same men at the front of the bunch. It's the US Postal Service team of Lance Armstrong at the moment, being led by Frankie Andreu there. And when Frankie Andreu rides onto the Champs-Élysées tomorrow, it will be the 9th year in succession that he's done that. And I think that must be somewhat of an American record, because he's taken part in the Tour de France for the last 9 years, and he's the only American to finish it for the last 9 years. So a big hats off to Frankie Andreu for that. A pretty impressive performance.
It certainly is. I'm sure he'll like to get one more under those wheels before he finally decides to retire. So 3 French teams represented on the attack. 2 of them are Frenchmen. This man is a Polish rider. And last year he won the Grand Prix of Zurich, by the way, Gregory Gwiatkowski. And that was a surprise, but what a demonstration of strength. He was in the lead for most of the race, and he finished a winner of that.
Impressive once you can get a World Cup victory under your belt. It gives you a name tag that everybody will remember you by. And certainly for the moment, he's quite happy to be in this leading group of riders who now feel are starting to stretch the gap, because it's actually gone over 4 minutes for the first time. But I'm sure they won't get up to the 10-minute mark, because it looks to me as if there's a fairly good tempo being set here by the US Postal Service. Now it's Benoit Joachim on the front, the champion of Luxembourg. And it must have been a pretty hard choice for the US Postal Service making their team of 9 riders for the Tour, because a lot of the guys were in pretty good form. And in fact, one man who in fact has done an excellent job throughout this 3-week bike race is Stefan Kjærgaard, the Norwegian rider on the squad. He was actually called in to the start of the Tour de France just 2 days before the kickoff, and the reason for that was because Christian van der Velde, one of the real stalwarts of the team, a man that they were expecting to do great things in the team time trial, was actually bitten by an insect which they believe could have been, in fact, maybe a spider bite, which got infected, and he had to withdraw from the event.
Yes, and I'm sure he's watching this with great envy, because it meant he wasn't on the team of the race winner, Lance Armstrong, for this year, which is a shame. But of course he's only young and he'll be back again, I know that. 4 minutes 10 seconds is the latest time gap now for these riders in the lead. And the reason that these boys here are not driving too quickly here is because overall the nearest to him, to Lance Armstrong, is Francois Simon, and he is a mere 2 hours and 10 minutes behind, so there's no good reason to chase. They've now covered in the region of 3,300 kilometres as the Tour de France rolls towards a close. Lovely view as we look out there across the pasture land and the vineyard, and the peloton actually is going quite quick. They're not so much interested in bringing those 3 back just now. They are concentrating more on limiting the escape, because if anybody wants to bring them back, it won't be the US Postal boys. It will have to be, at the end of the day, Farm Frites and I think the Telecom team. Paul, I don't think anybody else is going to help them.
Well, one team might just throw a couple of riders forward. We've seen that over the last couple of flat stages. Polti, because they do have a sprinter left, although we haven't seen him sprint this year in either the Tour of Italy or the Tour de France so far. Jeroen Blijlevens, a former winner of a stage in every Tour de France in which he participated, Phil, and at the moment he's pretty rapidly running out of days.
Well, I just cannot believe we've never mentioned his name the whole race virtually. He's never appeared at the head of the sprints. He seems to have lost all his urge to want to sprint, and that was why the Polti team took him on. And so if he doesn't sharpen his act up, he'll be finding his contract is out by the end of the season.
It's always a difficult profession, being a sprinter, because the number of occasions when you do get the chance to go out there and fight against the fastest in the world, like Eric Zabel, for example, who is such a consistent winner, Phil, and it's been a long time since he's won a stage at the Tour de France. He's been chasing one, but he loses a lot of energy out on the course as well, because he has to fight for the intermediary points as well to try and get himself a good lead in the green jersey competition, a competition which he feels is his own nowadays, because he's actually going to wear it onto the Champs-Élysées tomorrow for the 5th year in succession, taking that record away from the great Sean Kelly.
Yes, that really is sad for Ireland, but of course great for Germany. And Sean and Eric are pretty good friends, because yesterday when Eric came in off the time trial, he was up on the television tribune having a nice chat with Sean Kelly. He actually said to Sean that he was the rider he most admired before he became a professional cyclist. And so now he's taken Sean Kelly's record of green jerseys. Strange how these things work out, isn't it?
Absolutely unbelievable. And I'm sure we'll see a lot more of Eric Zabel in the rest of the season, because let's not forget, Phil, as well as looking to take his 5th successive points jersey at the Tour de France, he's currently the leader of the World Cup, a series of races, one-day races throughout the year to designate the most consistent bike rider. And at the moment, it's not really looking very much as if anyone can take that title away from Zabel this year.
No, no way. And we would all urge Zabel on, I think, because we'd love him to win a stage now in that green jersey. We're looking now at the 3 leaders on the stage today, and there's 3 of them with a lead of just over 4 minutes over the field. And this is Sebastian Hinault in the green, and Gregory Gwiazdowski and Francois Simon in the blue jersey, as they come up to the last sprint of the day here at Bar-sur-Aube. 199 kilometres covered. They've been out in front, the attack coming from Simon at 136 kilometres. And as you can see here, they are just running nicely towards the line, and they're not really interested in the prize. There is in fact a £500 prize for the first man across, and it looks as though Francois Simon, who is the local boy here, oh, and he thought he got it, and now he's got a race on his hands. And I think in fact that Gregory Gwiazdowski pinched that one on the line. Simon second and Hinault third.
Well, it was a pretty interesting little manoeuvre there. Gwiazdowski is a very great bike rider. He was riding for the Cofidis team last year, and in fact he switched across to the Française des Jeux for this season. 55 kilometres to go for these riders now, Phil, and still it's a very consistent black, white and blue train on the front of the main field. It's US Postal Service, and a quick laugh and a joke there with Lance Armstrong and his teammate, the Luxembourger Benoit Joachim. Very close to the front of the main field though, Jan Ullrich keeping an eye on affairs, and Christophe Moreau, the man who is the best placed French rider in this tour, and yesterday was certainly hoping to get himself a place on the podium, and it looks like now he's going to have to settle for 4th place behind his own teammate Joseba Belocchi.
Yeah, and they're just giving us the result there. There you have it as well. Gwiazdowski did pip it. I think he got a little bit annoyed there that Francois Simon had the cheek to just go and try and win the prize when they were riding through it and just doing their bit of a turn at the front. So he took him on and he took it off him. So Gwiazdowski gets the prize at the points where sprint at 199 kilometres, but they've still got 55 kilometres to go. And the field here yet to arrive at the sprint at Bar-sur-Aube. And there's the main field down there. 1 or 2 riders dangling off the back. They keep popping back to the car. When the race is not under pressure, the riders tend to, at the back, get a little bit bored, and they fall back into the cars to chat amongst the drivers and then race back on. You've got to be careful, though. There isn't an attack launched at the front, and then you get caught out.
Well, in fact, they shouldn't get too bored at the front end of the bike race, because in fact for the 5th hour of racing, Phil, the average speed was 45.5 kilometres an hour, so it certainly has picked up. The average for the whole race though is well under 40 kilometres an hour, and that will lower the average speed of this bike race this year. Last year when Lance Armstrong took his first victory, it was in fact the fastest ever Tour de France in history.
Well, long town here as we course through Bar-sur-Aube, as the riders will all, well, the spectators will all have heard of Simon sitting at the back there, but I'm not sure they'll know about the other 2. Here's the main field again, and there's the blackboard turn. It looks like it's 4 minutes 21 on that board at the moment, and that's a big gap, and we're looking now at 54 kilometres to go, so they're going to have to start thinking about it, Paul.
They're going to have to get some reinforcements for the rear. There's the official time check right now, 4 minutes and 19 seconds. And I think fairly shortly, Phil, some of the other teams will come forward and start to help US Postal Service, because they have to think about the stage victory. And strangely enough, it is the Pulte boys who've sent 1 or 2 riders to the front. This is Bart Voskamp, a former winner of a stage in the Tour de France. And it's the pink and white jerseys of Team Telecom who've also decided to send 1 or 2 riders forward to pick up the pace. There's a Farm Freets man in there as well for Robbie McEwen. So now I think we're going to see the main field taking up the chase in earnest.
Yes, and that's the first sign, and here comes Servais Knaven in the grey Farm Freets jersey. Pulte are getting involved as well, in the vain hope that Jerome Blijlevens might liven himself up and win a stage.
Well, it's pretty remarkable. You know, Blijlevens is a great sprinter. We've seen an awful lot of him in the past. I was expecting to see him sprinting well this year at the Giro d'Italia, because he had been brought across to the Pulte squad specifically as the team leader when it came down to the early fast sprint stages, but he certainly hasn't shown any of his class so far. Maybe he's, having survived the mountains, Phil, going to come up with something either today or tomorrow.
Well, I think 1 or 2 riders in the Tour are getting a little bit desperate, because they're employed to win stages as sprinters and it hasn't worked out. So we could still be treated to some excellent finishes here. Certainly they've come forward now. They're underneath the sprint banner now. So that was where the clock was taken. We'll have the latest time check there in a moment. But the thing is, that's where they've looked at their little maps in their back pockets, and they've decided that when we get to Bar-sur-Aube, that's when we must start the reaction. And there are 3 teams. 4 minutes 10 seconds is the time gap.
Well, they're picking up the pace here. You can see a lot of urgency in the pedalling style of these guys at the front of the main field now, and the pace, Phil, going well up towards 50 kilometers an hour.
So confirmation then, it's 4 minutes 10 seconds and the chase is now on. This is the main field coming through Bar-sur-Aube, and Servais Knaven, former champion of the Netherlands, off to the left there. This is Guirini. And the teams now, and it looks as though the big boys too of Farm Freets willing to help out here, and I hope they can carry Robbie McEwen to a shoulder-to-shoulder finish with Eric Zabel. That's the plan.
Well, there's a guy we haven't seen very much in the Tour de France since the very first week, the bald-headed figure there of Gert van Bont, the man who this year won the classic Gent-Wevelgem, a very good friend of Pieter van Petegem, the Belgian rider, former Belgian national champion with the amateurs, and a man who last year won the Tour of Flanders. So a lot more urgency, a lot more seriousness now, Phil, in the chase at the front, and Lance Armstrong's US Postal Service boys can take a back seat for a while now and allow everybody else to take the weight of the race on their shoulders.
So coming through the town here now, and the town getting treated to a high-speed peloton as action now begins here, hunting down, remember, 3 riders who are trying to steal the stage on French teams, all of them hours literally behind Lance Armstrong. He now will drop away from the action. He's not worried too much.
Well, the back of the field, this is the work of a domestique there. You can see just slipping back there, the red, white and blue jersey of Benoit Joachim. He's going back to the first car in the convoy. That is Lance Armstrong's car, and he will be loading up with drinks and any extra food that might be required by the team. And quickly shooting through the frame there as well, number 194 was Pascal Derame, and last year he actually was a member of the US Postal Service team, which helped steer Lance Armstrong to his first victory on the Champs-Élysées.
Yes, that's absolutely right. He switched back to a French team this year. You may recall in the race last year he had a sort of mauve come reddish hair, but he had one of those famous hair dyes during the Tour.
Serious chase now. You can see the pace has picked up a lot. There's Servais Knaven coming forward, the Dutchman. A very good bike rider on the flat stages. Moving forward as well, not looking quite so comfortable there is Giuseppe Guerini. He's much more of a climber on the Telecom squad, but certainly you can see that the pressure's on now.
Gentle lifting of the speed here by 3 teams who have all got sprinters who could win the day down in Troyes. But first of all, the domestiques, it's their job now to ride themselves and bring back those 3 breakaways. Always difficult to do, but they have this uncanny knack of closing down in the last 4 to 5 kilometers of the day. They're looking to close at the moment 4 minutes, and there we are, 4 minutes and 10 seconds.
Well, that's about par for the course, and are very much close to our usual equation of working things out. We're getting closer now to the 40 kilometer to go mark, and we usually work out that they need to pull back 1 minute in every 10 kilometers of racing, and we're looking at 49 kilometers to the finish line. So if they keep the pressure on in the main field, they should pull these 3 riders back into the fold.
The actual course itself, we're going steadily downhill. You wouldn't know it just now because we're going uphill here, but basically we're dropping away from a high spot of 400 meters on the course today. We finish at just 101 meters, and gradually now we get down there. So the terrain itself is not conducive to a breakaway that's only got 4 minutes, I don't think, but you never know. One man here, the rider wearing the blue jersey, Simon, he's every reason to stay away because he lives in the region and he wants to, like all French riders, do well at home.
Well, Giolovski here at the back there wearing 143, he's starting to have a few problems with his thighs there, just shaking the thighs to try and get a bit of the pain away. We've seen several riders over the last couple of days starting to suffer with cramps, and that's a lot to do with the hot temperature that's suddenly come to the Tour de France after what has been a really seasonally unfavourable weather climate, because it has been, I think, one of the coldest Tour de France's in years.
It has. It's only come good the last 3 or 4 days. Thankfully, since we left the Alps themselves were sunny but chilly, but once we came off the high mountains it's become sunny and warm, and I've not heard any complaints about that.
Everyone's pretty happy with that. A lot of riders very upset with the weather going through the Pyrenees, because that's where Lance Armstrong really revelled in the bad weather conditions on the stage up to Hautecam, a very long mountainous stage through the Pyrenees, and the attacks came on the Col de l'Aubisque. But you know, Armstrong really rode well in the bad weather conditions, and I was reading an article recently about the fact many people attribute that to the fact that he came into the sport of cycling from triathlons, and he was able to take the different changes of temperature maybe a lot better than some other people can, because of the fact that he would get out of a cold swim in the sea and then jump onto a bike, and his muscles were able to take that change more than anybody else.
Looking here then, you can see now 3:29, so they've knocked 41 seconds off the breakaway since they started the chase down. So this already is looking doomed, and these boys are coming up very, very quickly now.
Welcome back to Tour Plus and our extended coverage of the Tour de France. If you ever want to get a really good view of the finish line, this is the place to be. The VIP area reserved for very special guests, and if you do happen to have the right contacts, you could get yourself a seat in there for £250. If you haven't got those contacts and you do still want to see the finish from a close angle, this is the only other place you can come to. And in fact, you have to queue for an awful long time. I found Graham here. He's an English speaker, and in fact, he's been queuing for quite a while.
Yeah, I came from Paris this morning about 9 and arrived here about 11. So.
Well, that's 3 hours waiting so far, another 4 hours before the riders come in. Is it all worth it?
The atmosphere, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And who's your favourite for today?
Well, as an Englishman living in Austin, Texas, Lance Armstrong.
Well, I hope Lance is going to be okay. It's been a pretty tough day out on the road so far. Let's get straight back to the action.
They're doing very short turns at the front there, and Michel Lafisse, one of the few Swedish riders in the race, working on the front there in the grey jersey of Farm Frites. And they're going pretty quickly now. They'll be up to the 50km/h mark here now. You see the leading rider just goes through and moves straight across and allows the wind to push him back, while the next man relieves him full effort, eases up and then goes to the back.
There's Armstrong still surrounded by all of his teammates there, making sure that there's no problem going to come to the yellow jersey, because basically the only thing that could really rob him now of victory in this year's Tour de France, Phil, is an accident or a badly timed flat tyre. And that's why he's so close to the front, and he's got his teammates around him all of the time, because if there is a problem they will pretty quickly look after him.
That's for sure. As he goes on now towards his second win in the Tour de France. An incredible comeback from cancer, and he does feel that that made him a very different bike rider, because he recovered from cancer and his whole attitude changed with that.
Not only psychologically but physically he's changed as well, because of that illness and the treatment he's lost almost 10 kilos of body weight, which is around about 22 pounds, and it's made him a completely different bike rider. He seems to have retained a lot of the strength that he had before, but the fact that when it comes to the big mountain stages, carrying 10 kilos less has actually made him one of the top climbers in the world now.
Well, he does everything well now, and if you can do everything well, you can win the Tour de France. It's as simple as that. If you can climb, sprint and time trial, then you should be able to be up there somewhere. 205 kilometers of the long day. Still the riders, the main field, are just on 50 kilometers from the finish, while the breakaway is inside that.
See the movement in the main field now as everybody keeps trying to move themselves further forward. It's always a very strange situation, this, towards the end of a bike race, because you see the guys around the outside, they move forward to try and get themselves into the first 15 or 20 positions there, and what happens is they then sort of slide back down through the middle and end up finding themselves in 50th or 60th place.
Long straight road, here come the telecoms. No sign of the green jersey of Eric Zabel or Robin McEwen, the sprinters, nor Jerome Blyleven's just now. They're hiding in the first 20 of the riders, while the domestics just pull these 3 riders back. In theory they should. 3 minutes 10 they're saying now, so it's coming back. Laurent Jalabert, his brother, out of the race now. Nicolas having retired in the mountains, and Laurent Jalabert, ex-world #1, and could well be up there again by the end of the year. These are the 3 leaders now being applauded all of the way, and I'm quite sure many of them shouting "Allez Francois" because he's at home. But I don't think he can stay away. It would be nice if he could, but I just really don't think he can. 3:09, it's even getting less now.
Well, in around about 7 kilometres, they've just knocked off 1 minute off the advantage of this leading group of 3, and so they're well up on the schedule, and certainly they should be pulling this group of 3 back with around about 15 kilometres to go. Now that is when they need to be careful and watch out for counterattacks coming, because we've seen this in the past. The way that Eric Decker got his 3rd stage victory was to sit back and allow the Team Telecom to set all the pacemaking on the front, and then when we came to the final climb of the day, he was able to stay near the front, launched a great attack which they were then unable to respond to because they'd done too much work too soon.
Well, it's good to see the farm fleets going well now, because they've had a very unfortunate tour, and as much they haven't performed at all well. Robin McEwen has tried, but he's never had the speed yet, and when we interviewed him way back at the start of Futuroscope 3 weeks ago, he said he would like to win a stage in the first week and take all the pressure of having to win the last stage into Paris, which he did last year. Well, he hasn't been near winning a stage yet. He's been up in the first 6, but never in at the kill. Now he's going to have to think of today or tomorrow.
Well, he's a pretty crafty sprinter as well, Phil. He's one of those sprinters who doesn't have the huge power of a man like Eric Zabel or Tom Steels, but he does have the ability to ride in the first 3 or 4 places and takes the risks of not touching his brakes and ending up slipping back down through the main field. And Robbie will be looking out probably for a victory on a stage like tomorrow as well, where it is a very difficult sprint on the Champs-Élysées. It's around about 500 metres, and guys get a bit overexcited and start to launch the sprint too soon, and that's a mistake that on several occasions we've seen Eric Zabel make.
Yes, that's quite right. You saw the flags there, the French flags flying very strongly with the crosswind, and a word now from the Bonjour team manager here, which it might be, is it Jean-René Bernadotte? No, it's not, it's his mate. It's Thierry Bricolo.
Well, in fact, it wouldn't be Jean-René Bernadotte.
Not with a bald head.
Well, it wouldn't be Jean-René Bernadotte in the driving seat either, because he actually currently doesn't have a driving license. It was taken off him for 2 months for speeding. So, in fact, leading up to the Tour de France, he was in this strange position of actually trying to find himself a driver to keep him in the bike race.
Yes, I saw Jean-René yesterday, I think it was. He was already at the finish while the race was still out on the course. Anyway, he's got himself this brand new team Bonjour, and he would just love one of them to win a stage. It would make it very complete. They've only lost 1 rider, abandoned on stage 8. That was Christophe Fodo. All of the other 8 men are still in the Tour, and on the attack today is Francois Simon.
Well, Simon is the regional de l'étape, as they call it in French, the rider from the region, and in fact he hails from Troyes and used to be a member of the amateur cycling club here, the UVC Aube, which was the same team, in fact, that Malcolm Elliott used to ride for in his amateur days before turning professional initially for the rally squad, and then joining ANC and coming to ride the Tour de France and going on to be a very successful top professional in the United States.
Well, it's continuing to get closer to the leaders. It's now inside 3 minutes. Remember, when the stage started, it was 4:10, 2:56. And in fact, the race radio now is saying 2:55, so we can never agree with what comes on the screen. But anyway, 2:55 is now the latest gap, as the boys from Farm Friets, the Dutchmen, try to chase down these 3 leaders and put Robin McEwen in with a chance today.
Well, a lot of sprinters think they've got a chance today, because Pulte obviously do believe in the sprint of Jeroen Blijlevens. Maybe we'll see the resurrection of the Flying Dutchman as we get closer to the finish. He's had a very hard Tour de France. We've hardly seen him involved in any of the sprints so far, Phil. But the fact is, he has managed to survive the mountains. And once you do get through the mountains, if you have recovered well, then the sprints are usually a little bit different to the ones in the first week.
Yes, they are. You get surprise results. But I must say, today I expected a breakaway to have got away by many minutes, as it did the other day. But in fact, they didn't get away. Now we've got 3 riders in the lead, the main field chasing them down, and, well, we think they'll pull them back.
Looking down at the front of the main field, everybody, in fact, quite insistent on moving forward, and the big teams today have obviously decided to give the order to send as many of their team members forward to keep the pace high and try and pull back this leading group of 3. The man who's got the most to gain from the success of this breakaway, I think, really is this man here. This is François Simon, the former champion of France, and if they were to stay clear until the finish, he's the man with the fastest sprint. He's won a lot of stages of smaller races around France in the past, and having worn the tricolour jersey of the national champion last year, he must now be feeling pretty confident. Over his career, which started back in 1991, he's actually won 15 bike races, and his only real serious win this year, Phil, was a stage of Paris-Nice in March.
So, and this is Sébastien Hinault, and a very, very famous name he is too, but no relation to the great Bernard Hinault. But he's in the breakaway here, and the Crédit Agricole team that usually get a lot out of the Tour de France in the opening weeks with riders like Chris Boorman haven't had a lot out of this race because their big man, Bobby Julich, has not really come good at all this tour, and he just can't seem to do a thing right. And they lost their other man they brought in for this team this year, Jonathan Vaughters, with a crash, and so he went out with a broken nose. So they've had a really rough tour, and now if this breakaway were to stay away, it would be tremendous compensation for them.
Well, in fact, almost forgetting that Bobby Julich was in the bike race, because for a man who finished 3rd overall a couple of years ago, he really has been quite anonymous, even on the big mountain stages. I think if Vaughters had stayed in the bike race, Phil, I think we would have seen an awful lot more of Jonathan Vaughters than Bobby Julich, who for the moment is lying a very lowly 49th overall, almost 1 3/4 hours behind Lance Armstrong.
It is a great sadness, and the story was that his team weren't even speaking to him because he was so far behind. That's a shame, because, you know, he had one great ride and they've pinned a lot of hope in him, and it hasn't come out, and sometimes it doesn't always work out.
It's also a shame for Vaughters, because I think Vaughters would have been a serious man in the mountains this year, and unfortunately for him, it's the 2nd year on the run that he's actually crashed out of the Tour de France.
2:50 now, Paul. That's the latest one coming in. It still continues to fall down at 2 minutes 50 seconds, the gap.
Well, it's pretty consistent right now. They've got it organised fairly well, and in fact you can see that there are a lot of teams decided now to make sure that this breakaway comes back together. And for a lot of these guys, it's really getting towards the end of a very difficult 3 weeks of bike racing, and these are really now looking at some of the last pedal revs in anger.
And the tail of the peloton of the Tour de France, 128 riders, should be 129. Sadly, crashing out today, Michael Bogart, and that really very, very sad when you're only 2 days away from what is 3 weeks and a day pedaling around France, Switzerland and Germany. But he went out and taken to the hospital today with a nasty cut under his chin and a gash on his kneecap.
Pretty unfortunate for that man who was looking for a high finish even before the start of the Tour de France. He probably felt that he was capable of finishing in the top 5 in the overall standings, and a man who last year completely went to pieces after he was involved in that crash on the Passage aux Gois, and he lost more than 5 minutes on one stage, and that really seemed to have a psychological effect on the whole team, because Rabobank, Phil, last year were really absent from the Tour de France, and this year they have had a much better season with 3 great victories by Eric Decker and another win by Léon Van Bon.
There's a long straight road now as we head towards Troyes here in the department of the Aube, and it really is the sort of road where you can see 3 or 4 minutes up there, so they must now be getting some inkling as to where that breakaway is at 2:50. It'll just be in the trees up there somewhere, and judging by the length of the peloton here, then the pressure now really is on. There's only about 18 riders working at the front of it, and they're trying to get their 3 team sprinters up, who are just keeping their heads down now, out of way of the action, because they won't come forward until they know that their teammates are bringing back the breakaways.
Well, it's a serious organised effort now. You notice how several of the teams try and ride together in the line. That way they can communicate with each other. The man going through there, 115, is Michel Lafis, the Swedish rider, and immediately taking over is his teammate Koos Murenhout. And then the third man in that line of Farm Freaks riders is Servaes Kanaven. No sign right now of Robbie McEwen. The sprinters, as you say, Phil, will be sitting in about 15th to 20th place, trying to keep at the front of the main field, but certainly not riding in the wind. There's McEwen now riding up alongside Lance Armstrong, 117 for McEwen. But also watch out for 146, Emmanuel Magna, a pretty good sprinter himself when he's given the chance.
There's one or two riders here now, well within the capabilities of a stage win at this quality of sprinting. We've lost the big hitters, Tom Steels and Marcel Wust. They went out with various reasons, but both with sickness really, bronchitis. Pretty early on, once they got a smell of the mountains, they weren't too pleased with that, they left us. So there are some riders here now, just slightly below the top level of sprinting, who could produce a good finish today.
Well, a pity for Marcel Wust, actually, because he was such a character over the first few days of this Tour de France. He held the King of the Mountains jersey and then got himself a stage victory, and then wore the green jersey of the King of the Point, the points leaders jersey. And unfortunately for him, I think that very cold day in the mountains gave him a touch of bronchitis, which he just wasn't able to get over.
That's always the worry of a cyclist. The weather changes like it often does in a bike race. Temperatures warm in the valleys, freezing cold on the mountain tops, and when you descend in the cold winds, of course, your chest tends to pick up this bronchitis, so they're always frightened of that. 215 kilometres done at Magny-Fouchard now, Paul, and that's how long? 39 kilometres to go.
See Armstrong riding pretty sensibly there in the middle of that group in his yellow jersey, around about 15th position there. That's usually the safest place in the main field to be. The most dangerous place at the moment is down the sides, as you can see riders moving up all the time and then sliding back through the middle of this main field. And Jose Maria Jimenez, wearing number 15, Phil, at the back here for Banesto. He's quite happy to sit at the back of the main field. If there is a crash, he's going to get caught up in the back half of the main field if it splits.
Yes, he's got to watch out for that. Just inside 40 to go for the peloton, about 35 to go for the riders up front. The gap is still to the good. They've got to pull themselves together and concentrate, otherwise they'll be coming down on them a little bit too close to the finish to control the race in favour of Zabel or McEwen.
Well, the sprinters' teams are very much to the front right now, and one sprinter who also disappeared from the Tour de France is Robbie McEwen, who in the first week of this tour really looked as if he would be a serious challenger to Eric Zabel for the 3-week competition to take the green jersey. I think McEwen very sadly going out with a rather crazy crash on a day when nothing was really expected to happen, but in fact a slight fracture to his collarbone meant that he had to withdraw from the race. The remarkable thing is, though, Phil, that even with that slight fracture in the collarbone, he still did finish the stage. Yeah, absolutely remarkable. That's the toughness of Stuart O'Grady. Yeah, mainly when he rode to the medal, the silver medal in the Commonwealth Games time trial, he slammed into the barriers at 55 kilometres an hour, got up and finished, and had to be content with the silver. It would have been a certain gold. He was miles ahead, but he's a pretty tough bike rider. Well, there's a pretty dramatic crash as well going into that corner there around Shah Alam, just outside of Kuala Lumpur. And in fact, Phil, there wasn't an awful lot of skin left on his legs, and I think that must be the typical shot of the Tour. That field is full of photographers.
Look at them all. They must grow in that field. The farmer getting in his crops there, but they've all decided to set this one up, I think, with the horse race as well. And the fields must have known it was coming, because here we go.
Well, it looks like the charge of the Light Brigade at the moment. I have to say that the main field is still going at a fairly hefty pace, but these guys, if they're not too careful, might just find themselves tipping over.
Well, we won't laugh if they do. But this is very, very nice to see as the riders are racing alongside. They must have planned that one pretty well. Must have known there was no potholes coming up, otherwise we'd have wheels all over the place. I remember that reminds me of a situation, Paul, in the Tour of Malaysia, which is the Tour of Langkawi this year rather, in February. The cameraman set up a shot like that with a couple of the local cows, and as he flashed his camera, the cow panicked and knocked the rider off.
Well, that's not much fun when you've got a cow jumping onto your handlebars.
What about Eric Zabel this year in the Gent-Wevelgem when the horse ran out of the farmyard and knocked him off?
Unbelievable. He was just riding in the back of the main group and he was in a pretty nice situation. Then all of a sudden the thing leapt over the fence and into the back of the group. and Zabel decided to abandon. And he didn't take charges against the pony either.
No, he decided to drop all charges. But apparently the pony was owned by a 6-year-old boy, and Eric sent him a lovely letter saying that he didn't hold him responsible and gave him one of his team racing jerseys as well. Very nice gesture.
151 is Richard Virenque, the man who this year would have been taking the King of the Mountains title for the 6th time. But I think he decided to concentrate on trying to get himself a high place in the overall standings. Well, he didn't really manage to do that, although he will run out 6th overall in the Tour de France. But for him, he won't be the best Frenchman, because that is going to be Christophe Moreau, who will finish the Tour de France in 4th slot, 10 minutes behind Lance Armstrong.
I think one of the finest rides yesterday in the time trial, obviously Armstrong apart, was that of Giuseppe Bellocchi, because he had all of the pressure on him. He's come into this Tour de France in his first tour, and now he's in the 3rd place. He felt he was bound to lose that 3rd place yesterday to Christophe Moreau, who's his teammate, but of course when you ride a time trial, it's every man for himself. Moreau failed by 30 seconds because Bellocchi really did find his second win. Don't know if you know it, Paul, but he chose not to ride the special bikes given to him, but he chose to ride the bike which he won the time trial stage of the Tour of Romandy on this year, and it obviously is his lucky bike.
Well, it actually didn't look as if he was doing so well over the first few time checks, because he lost quite a bit of time early on. But he must have got the information coming back to him from the team car, because then he really dug in deep and managed to hold Moreau all the way to the finish. And he held on to that 3rd place there just by a mere 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, there's the gap. It is not coming down quite so quickly now at 2:23, as we're looking out for the 25 kilometres to go banner for the leaders. So they're on the schedule of about a minute every 10 kilometres again, and they really are going to have to lift that pace up a little bit to shut this breakaway down. So a show of defiance now, after it looked as though it was going to come down pretty quickly. Francois Simon here is saying something, I don't know what it is, but it's certainly directed at Hinault.
Well, he obviously knows the area pretty well here. What he was doing was shouting these riders to swing across to the left-hand side of the road. The road here is completely closed to traffic, and many of these roads are closed from 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And in fact, the reason he did that, Phil, was because of this. This was the shorter way around that corner. It might not be much, but it might save them 4 or 5 seconds.
Absolutely. He's racing home, don't forget, to Troyes, and his family's there for him when he arrives. And even if he loses and gets caught now, he's really put his name on the map today. He's been out in front since he attacked at 136 kilometres. He was joined by Gwiazdowski, Hinault and Roman Weinsteins. Weinsteins felt it wasn't going to work. He fell back into the pack, and these three have continued, and there's still a chance.
Welcome back to Tour Plus. You know, a lot of things have changed at the Tour de France since I raced. There are now huge multinational sponsors and a big merchandising campaign which pushes the Tour along. These small kiosks which dot the race route every day sell all kinds of things that are useful and things that are just for fun. I'm joined here by Lorraine, one of the sellers. Now, Lorraine, what's the most popular item at the Tour?
It's a yellow jersey.
27 kilometres to go for these three. The banner 25 might inspire the peloton, but it's come down suddenly now, 2 minutes and 1 second at 27 kilometres from the finish.
2:01, it's going to be really touch and go, and it does seem as if the chase is not quite as fast as it was over the first 20 kilometres of chasing, when they hacked off very quickly, 2 minutes off the lead, which was over 4 minutes and 10 seconds at the time. But in fact, it would be interesting to see if this does come down to a sprint at the end, because in fact we've only had 3 bunch sprints in the Tour de France so far. This really has been the Tour de France of the breakaway, and it's a long time since we've seen so many breakaways succeed in the Tour.
Yes, and really, if you think about it, those 3 bunch sprints we've had this year, there was probably a 4th if you count the one, probably a 5th too if you count the one into Lausanne, where they caught Eric Decker on the line and were given the same time, but they couldn't get past him. And the other one was in Limoges, when they caught Paolo Bettini, no longer in the Tour, right on the line, but they couldn't get past him either. They were such exciting finishes, though.
Dramatic finishes, all a question of down to the last few meters. Greatly timed to win there by Paolo Bettini, and I think the most exciting one must have been that one of Eric Decker's. And today we may well get treated to a big bunch sprint again, and we'll get a chance to see who's got the legs to produce a sprint which will be in excess of 60 kilometers an hour.
Well, I'm sure that if we come down to looking like a bunch into Troyes, then I reckon that we'll see Eric Decker try to nip away. We've already seen him in action very early on today at 52 kilometres. He was third in the first sprint, and then he fell back into the main field. We haven't seen him since.
Eric Decker, not only a winner of 3 stages in the bike race, but in fact, strangely enough, leading the award for the most aggressive bike rider in the Tour de France this year by a mere point from Santiago Botero.
Yeah, tremendous. Should be advantage Decker tomorrow, perhaps, if Decker has a go on the Champs-Élysées, because neither he nor Botero are probably gaining. I don't know, do they get a point if you finish third in the sprint?
You only really get points depending on how the jury votes, and normally it's a question of how aggressive you are on the stage and if you've actually been in a breakaway situation. And the breakaway that earned Eric Decker just a couple of points the other day on the road into Lausanne gave him the lead by 1 point. He'd started off on that stage just a point behind Botero, and I think those two riders will watch each other a little bit over the next couple of days, although Santiago Botero must be pretty happy with his Tour de France, with a stage victory on the road into Briançon, and of course the overall win in the King of the Mountains competition, which back in Colombia, where he comes from, is a very prestigious title.
Absolutely. Still the 3 boys, and up the road it looks like the 25 kilometres to go, Banner, so they're on countdown now. I don't know whether they can stay away. It is the last time check we've got was 2 minutes and 10 seconds, but it's just coming now. It's 1 minute 55 now at the 25 kilometre to go, Banner, for these 3.
It's going to be very difficult for them to hold off the main field, unless of course the main field cracks and they stop chasing in the group behind. At the moment, though, there are so many teams in there prepared to keep the pressure on and prepared to keep riding hard at the front. I think the advantage must go to the main field. 1 minute and 50 seconds with 25 kilometres to go is certainly not an advantage which is going to give them absolute confidence right now. And they will actually lose morale, Phil, at seeing the time board come up and indicate to them each time that it is getting lower as the kilometres get closer to the finish.
It's going to be desperately hard now, but the man in blue knows this road so well. He must have trained down it countless thousands of times in the preparation to ride the Tour de France, and he's got the occasion now to bring that great race towards his home city of Troyes. And number 199 has no wish to see the race behind again today until they're in the showers. But there it is, and it's moving very quickly over this long straight road right now, driven on by the domestiques of the top 3 sprinters teams, Polti, Telecom and Farm Frites, and that time gap says 1:39. Doesn't always agree with race radio, but I think they are coming in very quickly now.
You can see the main field really has got the hammer down. The pace is well up to the 50 kilometre an hour mark, and I think it's going to be a shame for the Simon brothers, who are actually down here at the finishing line, Phil. Jérôme, Pascal and Régis, the 3 brothers who've all got themselves a stage victory at the Tour de France, would be willing their brother François here to a certain victory, but unfortunately that's not going to work, I don't think, because the main field is going to decide otherwise.
Well, that's a shame. 25 kilometres to go then for the peloton. It's certainly less than 2 minutes since they passed under there, and the Farm Frites are working very hard at the front. Well, they're saying 1 minute 40 seconds under that banner for the peloton. The drive is on. They should bring them back, and there's a lot of urgency in the race behind now as we head in towards Troyes.
Well, the main field has still got the hammer down. They are now starting to eat into that advantage, and I think fairly shortly we'll get the 1 minute mark being given to us, and that is when the breakaway will almost be over. But those 3, Phil, at the front of the race, they will not give up. They will dig as deeply as they can, because now they are completely committed to try and hold off this main field. But if you just look at the length of the main field at the moment, you know that they're going along at pretty high speeds.
Well, absolutely flying here, and they're on the outskirts of town, this long straight road which will continue almost in to Troyes there as they pass the Orient Lake, the Lac d'Orient, and race up towards the city itself. These are the 3 now just living in hope. That's all they can do really, is just pedal as fast as they can and just hope that the rider behind have a moment's relaxation and the gap opens up again. Well,
Simon putting very urgent turns in at the front and encouraging the other guys to come forward here. You can see he didn't even stay at the back for more than a fraction of a second here, and what a great chance it would be to him, Phil, to be able to get himself a victory, come up alongside the rest of the brothers in the family and get himself that stage victory in the Tour de France that they all have, and to boot in his hometown of Troyes. It will be something like out of a storybook, but I think it's not actually going to work out the way the script was written.
Well, it's desperation now on little Francois' face there as he drives on. This is Lac d'Orient, very tranquil place. It's a huge lake here, and there are two in fact. There's one next door called the Lac du Temple as well. And now, while they enjoy the recreation on the lake, the three up front are living desperate times now as the peloton speeds on its way, hopefully to lasso them before the finish.
Big speed in the main field now, and you can see the sprinters teams, Phil, today have all decided to work together. In the past, what we've seen at the Tour de France is one sprinters team taking the responsibility for the chase, either the Seiko team of Mario Cipollini or the Mapei team of Tom Steels. But today what is happening is all of the teams have sent riders forward, and that's causing a certain amount of distress at the back of the main field. Because of the pressure in this main field, it's actually split, and there's a group going off the back.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's got a bit painful at the back there. Look at the split now. You see somebody's left the door open in the crosswind here, and once you do that, it is very, very difficult to close because we're in excess of 50 kilometers an hour, and those riders behind didn't expect to be finishing behind the race today, but it looks like they might.
Well, that's panic now. That's sheer panic for those guys there. They didn't expect the main field to split, and the split probably happened because somebody's legs were just a little bit too tired after 3 weeks of bike racing, and they just left the gap go open. One man caught at the back there. In fact, it was 51, Laurent Jalabert. He's in the back split of this main field at the moment, and he's going to hope that somebody's just got a little bit more energy in his legs there at the front of the group. And if there is a slight slowing, they may well manage to reintegrate the front of the main field. But there are other riders, Phil, at the back who've missed out on that acceleration.
Well, that's why, of course, the race leaders never ride anywhere other than the first 20 riders of the bunch, because they don't want to be caught off in the split like that, because these riders behind here now are in a little bit of trouble, and I don't think they'll be going back to the front. It looks as though Benoit Joachim has also been caught at the back here for US Postal.
Well, he has, but he's done a lot of work at the front of the main field, and nobody's going to say that he's not done his job over the last 3 weeks of this bike race. But it is interesting to note that their number 51 is in the group, Laurent Jalabert, the Once rider. Hasn't had a great tour. He was looking very competitive over the first 10 days or so, very happy and confident with the win that Once got in the team time trial in the first 4 days of the Tour de France, and the yellow jersey on his shoulder to boot. But since then, he really has been more noticeable by his absence in the mountains.
20 kilometers to go for the three leaders, and they've got about 80 men chasing now, so that's reduced the odds a bit as they just continue to race towards the finish here. Francois Simon, knowing that his three famous brothers, now retired, are waiting to greet him when he gets there, whether he wins or not, because he certainly put on a great show today. Here is the big race now. See the flags, the wind coming from the left of our picture, and the crosswind is the scourge of professional bike racing because it rips the field apart.
Another US Postal rider missed that split as well there. Number 7, Stefan Kiergaard, the Norwegian rider. But they did a great job, and for the moment Lance Armstrong doesn't really need all of his teammates up there alongside him. Armstrong is there in the yellow jersey, sitting on the tail of the green jerseyed Eric Zabel, and he will ride very close to the front there, Phil, because he will know that there is always the possibility of a split in the main field. And after fighting over this Tour de France to conserve seconds here or a minute there, he wouldn't want to throw a few minutes away on a silly split like that towards the end of the Tour.
Well, I reckon there's about 70 riders in that group. There's the three leaders, and here comes the pan, which they wouldn't like to see. But it's still a reasonable gap. We're inside about 19, maybe 18 kilometers. Still a good gap is this. As we're watching the fragmentation of the Tour de France today on the run into Troyes. After all of the big efforts, the riders are now in a little bit of trouble. The latest time check is 1 minute 10 at 20 kilometers to go for the leading chase.
Well, that's going to be very difficult because you can see a lot of pressure on in the front of the main field, and nobody from Team Telecom is shirking the work either. Polti are in there, as well as the Farm Freaks team of Robbie McEwen. Now, that would be a great victory for Robbie McEwen, who has certainly felt confident because he's managed to drag his body over the mountains. And that's always the big worry of the sprinters, Phil. The mountain stages, every day is a panic to know whether or not you're going to finish inside the elimination time They've done all of that now. They've got the mountains behind them, and all they can see on the horizon is that great big spike in the distance called the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the site they're all waiting for. 128 of the original 180 should now safely arrive in Paris tomorrow. Lugigny-sur-Basse is where the breakaway are now, and they are just giving everything they have got left. This man always looks pretty cool though. Gregory Gwiazdowski, the Polish rider on La Française des Jeux, as he does his bit of a turn at the front now. They're 18 kilometers from the finish here. That's ever so close, and they've still got a minute and 10 seconds in hand. They actually pulled back 30 seconds in the last 5 kilometers.
Well, in fact, they've just been at the front of the bike race for 100 kilometers going through that point there, and these three guys really now know, Phil, that the main field is chasing them in earnest. This is the panic in the group at the back. This is the group that has been splintered off the back of the front half of the main field, and you can see the fact that they're riding in that diagonal line across the road indicates that the wind is coming from the right hand side, which is why everybody is just trying to get shelter from the rider in front. And the worst place to be at the moment is on the left hand side, because you don't get any shelter at all. And the two US Postal Service riders, they're really just hanging on here at the moment.
1 minute the latest check, as the peloton with the maillot jaune, there it is, have just come into the town of Lugigny. And it looks as though it's getting a little bit bigger there, because a slight change of direction means a change of wind direction, and the boys at the tail might come up here now and tag on to that big pack. It looks as though it is slowing down again.
Well, they're a compact bunch all over the road, and that is because the wind has swung into their faces somewhat, so it's taken a bit of the impetus out of the chase there, and that group of riders will just about get onto the back before they get the crosswind again. And the important thing then is to scramble up to the front to make sure that when it does split again, at least you're not in the second half of the main field.
Well, we are right on the edge of Troyes now for the field. We're across the main autoroute, taking them up towards Paris later tomorrow morning. Well, they'll be in a train, fortunately, but all the cars have to go up as well, as the field regroups here to reconsider what is happening.
It's still a concerted chase at the front by the teams of the sprinters, so almost certainly we will be treated to a royal sprint of the men who have managed to survive the mountains of this year's Tour de France, the men who take incredible risks coming into the final kilometre of a race to try and dodge underneath whoever it might be in front of them at the time.
Scramble time at the back, boys, as the second part of the bunch now tags on to the tail of the front group. That's a bit of a desperate effort here, isn't it? But in fact, that change of wind direction has allowed them to close the gap, so the chase was worthwhile. Probably just one or two boys left behind the Tour de France today now.
Well, that's the best place to be, in that front group of riders there, and in fact that split just quite getting on at the moment. It really is a struggle for those guys in the second part of the split, and a lot of riders now also further back have been tailed off, and they won't see the main field again today.
So they're all back together again, at least most of them. A few deep breaths before the pressure goes on once more, as it certainly will, as we run down towards the 15 kilometers to go banner. It's still a long way to stay away from this bunch, but they haven't quite got it together yet, and there's still a chance.
Well, the two US Postal riders at the back there, Kierkegaard and Benoit Joachim, are just going to stay there at the moment. Their day is done. They've done an awful lot of work over the majority of this stage just to keep the main group together and not too far behind that leading group of three riders.
I'm very surprised that the breakaways today haven't gone and got more time, but they've been kept together for one reason or another. Looks like Salvatore Camesso in the red jersey dashing up on the far right of our picture. Man that's got his stage win now in Germany, and happy with that. Now, of course, he's free to try and get another one, because once you've got one under your belt, then everything else is a bonus.
See those two lines of riders now, the left line moving forward consistently and the right line moving backwards. Those are the riders doing all of the work. Armstrong very comfortably in that gap there. That is a gap that he will try and hold and stay in that gap on the final 10 or 15 kilometers to make sure he doesn't get involved in any of those splits, or the possibility of a crash, which may happen as tired riders start to drag their way to the front and maybe make a mistake in their maneuvering and touch a wheel or touch a pedal and go down.
Well, it surely cannot work now. 55 seconds it is, as we're watching with 15 kilometers to go. And I don't know where our television producer gets his time checks from, but they're never matching the ones I get. He says it's now 53 seconds.
This is the village of Colombe-les-Deux-Églises, about 70 kilometres from the finish. So by the time you see this, the riders will have been and gone. In 1960, though, the entire race came to a halt here. The reason was Charles de Gaulle, who'd retired here to write his memoirs and turned up unannounced among the crowd to watch the Tour go by. When the race directions spotted him, they quickly sent word back to the peloton, and a sort of general stoppage was organised in his honour.
Les coureurs descendent de vélo. La plupart ôtent leur casquette dans un geste de respect et ils vont écouter, émus et éblouis, les félicitations et les vœux que le président adresse à Nencini, Gragzik et Darrigade qui sont au premier rang du peloton et à qui le président va donner une cordiale poignée de main.
The stage winner that day was Pierre Bouffoy, and although there's nothing in the archive footage to back it up, the story goes that he was trailing behind early in the stage after a crash, and while the rest of the riders were paying their respects to the former president, he went flying by, took the lead, despite a chase from the main field, held on for his first ever stage win, and a place in history, which he celebrated by taking one look at the podium girls and kissing his manager. Now that's the official version as sanctioned by the Tour's Myths and Legends department, but as usual with great stories, the truth is a bit harder to come by. The race report in Le Mans the following day had the winning breakaway down as 70 kilometres, which would place it here. The TV report, though, said 50 kilometres, and an upcoming film by Oliver Stone apparently claims that it wasn't Bouffoy who won at all, but a mafia stooge who was supposed to assassinate de Gaulle with a sharpened spoke-tightening tool. So take your pick. All we can say with certainty is that it's nicely filled a feature spot on a quiet day. Let's go back to the racing.
So the same three riders are still clear, and they're now gambling on a desperate finish in Troyes. 53 seconds is the gap with 14 kilometres to go. And now, Paul, can they do it?
I don't think they're going to do it. You can see the pressure on the face here of Francois Simon. He looks like Jérôme Simon, and in fact he rides a bike just like his elder brother as well. But it is an urgent pedalling side. Davidovsky, however, Phil, looks pretty cool, calm and collected, and looks like he's the freshest of the three. And the man tagging on the back is Sébastien Hinault of Crédit Agricole. But there is a difference in the speed between them and this main field. The main field, I think, today is going to pull back its prey.
Well, I wonder. They've timed it maybe to perfection. Telecom could be bringing Eric Zabel towards that elusive stage win. Or is it a revitalised Polty boy, Jerome Blylavens, who might snatch the win at the finish? Or will the little Australian Robbie McEwen pop out the bunch? They're the three men most likely to succeed if it comes to a bunch sprint, but you never know. There are some riders in here now who will fancy the chances because of the loss over 3 weeks of the real fast sprinters like Marcel Vust and Tom Steels.
And watch out for the Rabobank boys too, because they're not getting involved in this chase at all at the front of the main field, and it may well give one of their men a chance to leap out of the pack. Markus Zuberg, the champion of Switzerland, he's a pretty good sprinter when it comes down to races like this, especially after 3 weeks in the saddle. And Eric Decker, who knows what can stop that man? He's had 3 stage victories so far, and he'll be looking for a late attack like he did a couple of days ago on the road into Lausanne.
Yes, Eric Decker chooses to win in any way he can. And remember the first time he won a stage into Villeneuve-sur-Lot, he broke away from a breakaway group and time trialled alone the last 30 kilometres. And then the next time he won, he chose to go on a sortie of over 200 kilometres with Santiago Botero and then beat him in the sprint. And his third win coming in Lausanne, he got away in the last 500 metres and he won it in the same time as the bunch. So you can never work out his tactics, that's for sure.
Well, there's the 3 leaders, and they're just coming into view right now. Should be the main field. They're in the same straightaway now, and it's down to around about the 40-second mark. So pretty shortly we will see the front of the main field catching these guys, and that's a sign which is bad for their morale. You see that yellow car moving forward.
Yeah. That's
the neutral service vehicle, and once that car is moved out of the gap, these guys know that it's virtually all over.
Well, surely they are now going to be wheeled back in at around about the 15 kilometres to go, Bannon. They don't want to see that blackboard right now because they're desperate. Just look at the way Francois Simon on the right here is driving, and he flicks his left arm to call through Gwiazdowski, who will go as best he can for about 30 or 40 metres and then call through Hinault. Hinault, I think, is on the limit now. He can't go much quicker. He's having a job getting over the top of the rider from La Française des Jeux, and you see how anxious Simon is here. He hardly allows anybody to go to the front. He wants the race back up. 11 kilometres to go, and they'll barely make the 10 kilometre to go banner now.
Well, Simon was really struggling there. He's pulling himself right forward on the saddle, trying to get a bit more power into those thighs of his. But looking back down the road, the main field now know they've got their prey in sight, and they will now just accelerate slowly to pull them back into the fold. It's still holding though, it's still 40 seconds at the moment, and one thing that the main field should not do right now is gain too much confidence and shut off the chase.
Well, again, that big peloton is being stretched here. You see the gaps at the back end of the group because they're being driven on by the Polti. This is Geert van Bont of Farmfleet who is coming through. Then it's Guirini riding so hard today on flat roads for Eric Zabel. We haven't seen the sprinters come through yet. They're sitting, waiting just to see the progress of the domestiques.
Alberto Eli is the next Telecom rider on the front to set the pace-making here. And Pascal Hervé, the Polti rider. And if you look a little further back, the other Polti rider doing a lot of work at the front of this group is the man who's 6th overall in the bike race, Richard Virenque.
Yes, Pascal Hervé and Virenque aren't afraid to work here in the hope they can get a stage win for the Polti team. Still hovering at around 40 seconds, Paul. It is a, well, whatever you say about them, they are not going to give this one up without a real fight.
Well, what Francois Simon will try and do now, Phil, is get himself to the outskirts of the town. If they can get to the outskirts of town with an advantage of 30 seconds or so, you can be sure that Francois Simon will know every corner of the run into the finish line here, and he may hope that he can hold off the main field, because the main field can't negotiate the streets of a town quite as fast as a small breakaway group. They're not able to pick their way around the corners quite as easily as a small group of 3. The group of 3 now, Phil, coming up to the banner, and that banner will tell them it's going to be 10 kilometres to go.
So the watch will start counting again now as all of the cheers for Francois Simon at the front of this group, desperate to drag it into town to show all the family and his brothers how good he is as a professional bike rider, and he is good. He rode his first Tour de France in 1993, and on that occasion he got an early lead in the King of the Mountains. Since then he's won the French Championship. Now here's the Seiko boys, and looks to me as though they're in a little bit of trouble here, Paul. The wind has split off Salvatore Camesso.
Well, Camesso, I think, was caught in that earlier split off the back of the main field, and in fact you can see now the bunch is actually disappearing away from him. He's alongside his teammate here, Atienza. They're trying to stay in contact, but you know the pressure is on at the front of the main field, and they're not going to slow down as the main field goes inside the 10-kilometre banner as well, and the time gap on that line, Phil, was 27 seconds.
It's nothing now as they come up towards the line. They seem to have timed their capture between the 5th and the 10th kilometre almost to perfection. Now we'll see if tactics change as they sense the catch here, because they may not want to close it right down. They may want to just let them dangle for a little while longer. It's now only 17 seconds here. The face on Sebastian Hinault suffering now, and I don't think he can help them too much longer. He's still doing his best, but I think he's just about on the end of his strength today. It's been a long breakaway this. It never really got away from the field either. It just got over 4 minutes and then the reverse started. But these are the 3 riders, and well, they could well trap them just before they enter the area of Troyes. We race right into the centre of the town today.
Well, Francois Simon here will know every inch of this run-in, Phil. This is where he's from. He was hoping to do something special for the brothers who turned out to watch him at the finish line here. The 3 brothers, Jérôme, Pascal and Régis, all stage winners of the Tour de France. And you can see now the main field really has still got the hammer down. A little bit dangerous there. That motorbike got too close to the riders coming around that main field, and that's one thing you have to look out for on the run into the towns here. They will get themselves organised again, but that roundabout, in fact, just taking the organisation out of the front of the main field, and that will give the advantage to the 3 leaders, but not much.
Well, it's barely 15 seconds now as the Polti riders here are riding on the front. This is Bart Voskamp who's setting the pace, and they continue to drive on. Look at that strong crosswind, the Dutch flag that was flying across the road. So it's now completely hitting the side of the race here, and if you allow the door to open between the wheels, and that wind will take you out of the race, and whoever's behind you comes with you. And that's what's happened indeed to Salvatore Camesso. He is now behind the race as these boys are heading down towards the finish. Just 8 kilometres to go
You see the way they're riding, just using half of the road as well, and the reason they're doing that is to give as fewer riders as possible shelter from the wind. That really puts a lot of pressure on the men in the last 10 or 15 places, which is why we've seen the winner of stage 18, Salvatore Commesso, go off the back of the main group. There are the three leaders, and pretty shortly you'll see there is the main field. The main field, I have to say, Phil, is being reduced all of the time because of the pressure of the chase at the front.
Look at these guys at the bottom of your picture now. See, somebody's opened the gap again and left them in the mainstream. And once you lose the comfort of the comparative comfort, this is Lance Jalabert again here, and Benoit Joachim, they've lost it, and this time I think they said that's it, we're going to ride the last 7 kilometres in to the finish, because we're not going to get back on. Once you get hit by that crosswind, you're finished.
Well, that's been a tough bike ride for Jaja throughout this 3-week Tour de France, whereas number 51 was regarded as a big favourite before the start of the Tour de France, and certainly never quite managed to live up to that. But he has been a personality here at the Tour, and these three guys, Phil, they still are not going to give up at all. Francois Simon is racing into his hometown. He wants this breakaway to succeed, and the referee there with the red shirt on is just trying to keep the motorbikes out of the way, just to make sure that they don't falsify the event.
We are so close to the town. There's the roundabout taking us into Troyes now. This is the peloton is racing so quickly now. They're shedding riders off the back on the run-in. Woo, and he just dodged round that. And the other poor chap, he's gone the long way round, but he might get back before the peloton passes through. Always difficult. He's come back okay, but have wasted a lot of energy, of course. In fact, he's in trouble here, Paul, because he's got a split in the road. He'll have to go around the next one on his own as well.
That's pretty unlucky.
And the people here on the road, this is dangerous now, because the people are crossing the road here.
Well, the most important thing for him would probably be just to jump across the central reservation, but there he is. He's got caught in no man's land. What's he going to do now? He's right behind the barriers. If he doesn't speed up, he's going to miss the back end of the main field. It's a long time since I've seen anything like that happen.
Well, I don't think I can recall it happening, but the crowd thought the race had chosen that route, and one rider chose not to. Anyway, it looks like he's through safely, but he really has had to make a meal of that chase, and he might not tag on to the back. Meanwhile, back at the front, these are the three riders now. They are running like scalded cats for the finish, and the field are having to work very hard to catch them.
They really are. You know, Francois Simon is digging really deep into his energy bags right now. He's hoping to survive. He's waiting now to see the banner that indicates 5 kilometres to go. And I think they've done an incredible job to hold off this main field, because once it came down to 30 seconds, I thought it would be all over in a matter of a couple of kilometres. But still, they have managed to survive. And the reason they're surviving, I'm sure, is because Francois Simon is from this town right now, and he knows that if he can just get a few more seconds advantage, there's the chance. He's attacking now. He's going to go off the front, and the other two guys can't respond.
Well, what a fabulous show of defiance by Francois Simon, driven on by the fact that you can't see the crowd, but we can at the finishing line. They've just spotted the attack on the big TV screen. They have let out an enormous cheer here at the finishing line at 5 kilometres to go, as they've seen Simon break away. Well, caught or not today, Paul, he's done enough to establish himself in his home city of Troyes, because this man now, with 4.5 kilometres to go, if you want to catch him, you're going to have to take him flat out.
Well, they're going to have to take him flat out. Hino and Giardowski saw the attack come, but they couldn't respond. They've been at the front of the bike race for more than 100 kilometres. This guy lives here. He's on home turf. He's the only one of 4 brothers who doesn't have a stage victory at the Tour de France, to his credit, and he's giving everything to get it right now, and he may well have caught them hopping, because they've got to keep the pressure on if they're going to catch him, Phil.
Well, as you say, they're now in the streets of Troyes here, and it is very, very difficult around these many, many roundabouts. But the lone figure of Francois Simon, they're coming at him very, very quickly as he sees 4 kilometres to go. That might be the banner when he suddenly finds he has company.
He looked under his shoulder there. That's a sign he wants to know if there's anybody coming up from behind. He's got 4 kilometres left of this bike race to go, and the main field is hammering along behind him. You know, he's rocking and rolling all over his body there, and his bike, I should say. He's gone inside of the town of Troyes. He's just hoping to survive. His advantage is not very much more than 5 or 6 seconds.
Well, there's a lady opposite me in the grandstand here. She just wiped a tear away from her eye, because she is so excited now that Francois Simon looks like he has a chance as he comes round that corner, takes the whole road up. He knows the run-in. I'm sure he rehearsed it many times in the hope he could be in a breakaway, and I've never seen a crowd so excited here.
Well, the crowd are going absolutely balmy out there at the moment. They really want this young man to win, and you know, this is just exactly how his brother Jérôme won on the stage into Strasbourg. He got away off the front of the main field, and they were flying along behind him, and he just managed to hold them off. You can't get more motivation than this man has right now. He's racing on home ground, and he's looking at a stage victory. But the main field, Phil, they're right on his tail. They're not more than 8 seconds back just now.
Well, there's the gap. You can see it yourself from the helicopter. This is a desperate sprint from the riders behind. They have got the problem of not organising the chase for their sprint leaders, because this young man refuses to go back into the bunch, and he is now under 3 kilometres from the finish.
3 kilometres, he's got to ride for another 4.5 minutes to try and stay off the front of this main field. He's holding it. I don't know how he's holding it, but he's still got around about 75 metres advantage in the main group now. It's Pulte on the front. They're lifting the pace, but not one rider has managed to inch back towards the man on the front of the bike race, Francois Simon. He keeps looking over his shoulders. He probably can't believe himself that he's holding them off.
Well, I tell you, we've seen some superb finishes on the Tour de France this year. This will go down as one of the best. This rider, I think, is about to be caught at something like 2.5 kilometres to go, but they have had to work so hard to haul him back. He broke away at 136 kilometres of today's stage. That is a long time to be in the lead, and it's Eric Zabel's Telecom team who are finishing it off.
Well, on the front it looks like Alberto Eli inside 2 kilometres to go. He is not going to do it, Phil, but he is not going to give up until he sees the shadow of a Telecom rider come by him. Alberto Eli is right onto the wheel now of Francois Simon. It is all over for the Frenchman, but what a great performance.
Well, absolutely fabulous ride that by Francois Simon, caught at the 2 kilometre banner. Now, is that time enough for the sprinters to reorganise here? Because the Pulte boys have got an awful lot of men at the front right now.
Well, there's a lot of Telecom riders on the front here. This is Hepner now moving forward. Alberto Eli swinging off. He has done his job for the day, but there are also a lot of Pulte riders in there. The second man in the line is Voskamp. Up there is a rider from Farm Friets. The sprinters are in that little group of riders behind. They're all fighting for the tail of one man, the man in the green jersey, Eric Zabel. He's about 10th place at the moment. Team Telecom making the big lead out, but there are an awful lot of Pulte riders there. 5th, 6th in the line there is Jeroen Blijlevens. It's the first time we've seen him come to the front in the Tour.
Well, there's a slight change now as they start to move up with the second wave, and Eric Zabel going with that one as he follows 2 teammates through. Bet on your life. One of them is Gian-Matteo Fagnini, who finished last in the time trial yesterday at 1 kilometre to go. This is anybody's race.
Well, Fagnini is right there in front of the green jersey Zabel. This is the dangerous part of the course inside the final kilometre now. This is the moment when the lead out men start to slip back, and it makes it very dangerous. Vinokurov is right up there. Fagnini is the next man, and there is the green jersey. This is the big sprint. They're starting it out now for the Pulte, but right there the control is still on the shoulders of Telecom.
Well, I think the Pulte have made a mess of this, because it looks as though the Telecom train with Vinokurov on the left, is he leading Zabel to equal the record of German stage victories? He moves off now. Fagnini, the man who rewarded himself so well in the Milan-San Remo when he led Zabel to victory, is now going to lead him, is he, to what would be a record equaling 8 stages. Look at the face of Zabel. He's seen the finish line clean now for the first time. Is this going to be the stage he's wanted so much? He's being challenged to the line, and I'm not so sure he's going to. It's a desperate win, but Eric Zabel has done it, and my goodness me, I think all of Germany will not settle down tonight.
Absolutely unbelievable. He equals the record there of Rudi Altig, and the man with the green jersey gets what he's looked for several years, Phil, a stage victory. A remarkable performance by the man in the green jersey.
Just take a look at this now. Roman Weinstein is there, Robin McEwen is there, behind is Freddy Rodriguez, but this man, desperate. And finally, Jeroen Blijlevens gets into our picture as well. But today, they are not getting past the man in the green jersey. He's waited 3 years for this. He's equalled the record number of stage wins in a Tour de France. He's now got 8, and he's got a chance of going one better tomorrow. Yes, but tonight it's been a long time coming, but Eric Zabel welcomed home by his team here as he gets his first win in a stage of the Tour de France after a wait of 3 years. In fact, since he last won in Pau in 1997. Zabel wins are just ahead of Robin McEwen and Jeroen Blijlevens. Weinstein and Van Heeswijk follow. Jan Ullrich was 24th, and Lance Armstrong, keeping an eye on the German, he came home 27th. David Miller was 93rd, and he too was in the same time as the winner. But it was a battle of 2 top sprinters today, Eric Zabel and Robin McEwen, and we spoke with them both. First, Eric Zabel.
For me, personally, a big moment this stage win. I think it's the sweetest.
Were you worried about the comeback of people like Blijlevens and McEwen who were fighting on your wheel?
Yeah, after the first week, when we don't see the two guys so often in the sprints, it's naturally that it comes a little bit pressure also from the team managers, and I'm happy that I win for these two fast guys, so I'm still there.
You were talking about records, 15 times second, but now you've equaled Rudy Altig's record, you've beaten Sean Kelly's record, you're writing yourself into the history books.
Yeah, but I think that's not so important. Important for me and myself, it's to have fun on bike race, and I still have fun. So in the last years I have also fun in a race when I was just second, but I'm still in a bunch to fight, and I'm a little bit like a adrenaline junkie, and I go in the sprints and I have fun there, and that's most important thing for me.
I just didn't have the strength in the last 50 metres. I didn't come that good out of the wheel. I don't know, I muffed it slightly, but Eric was very strong. I came out and started coming, but that last half a wheel length, I couldn't make that up anymore, and Eric was really strong, I guess. He's been waiting a long time to win a stage, a couple of years, so a bit of extra incentive not to lose it. I really wanted to win, but just didn't have it.
Last chance saloon tomorrow then?
It's a bit like last year. I was second in Bordeaux and I thought I was going to win there. Bit of the same situation. I'm feeling good. I know I'm going good enough. Just have to be able to pull it off.
I know you don't want to finish second under any circumstances, but if there is a man that you're going to lose a stage win to, I suppose Zabel deserves one.
Oh yeah, I mean it's good for Eric. He's won a stage because he's been one of the best sprinters over the last years, and he's going to win it again, the green jersey. That was 5 times in a row, but he hadn't won a stage for a couple of years, and I think that was really starting to get his morale down. So now that's a big weight off his shoulders. Maybe he'll relax a bit for tomorrow.
OK, let battle resume in Paris tomorrow, but tonight it's Erik Zabel getting his 8th Tour stage win, first winning in 1995. He now equals Rudy Altig's German record. Overall, though, no change at all with 1 day to go, and Lance Armstrong keeps his 6 minutes 2 seconds over Jan Ullrich. The Festina boys, Belocchi and Morrow, follow. David Miller is 62nd. A final leader's jersey today for Lance Armstrong, and tomorrow he will get a winner's one for a second year. So that's it. The Tour de France is now finished with this longest day, but not for everybody on the Tour, of course. We're all now heading for Paris and for the big finale. The riders will reassemble at the base of the Eiffel Tower for the big finale on the Champs-Élysées. We'll be back this afternoon at 6 o'clock with a special 1-hour programme of the final day of the race. It's the end of our Tour Plus extended coverage for this year, and I hope you've enjoyed that. Until tonight, goodbye. Up for Paris perhaps, beating Jackie Durand and Eric Decker. Then came a crash 10 kilometres later, and out of the Tour, Michael Bogart of Holland and the Rabobank team. Bleeding, he reluctantly went into the ambulance today, and this will be the first time in 5 tours that he will not have reached Paris. That really is bad luck. These 3 riders are the remnants of a 4-man breakaway, in fact. Roman Weinstein of Vino was up here with them. He decided it wasn't going to work, so he fell back. The breakaway having got away, an attack by Francois Simon at 136 kilometres into the race. And now the latest gap we've got is just under 3 minutes. And when Francois got away, he was first over the top of the Côte de Chaumont, chased by Gwiazdowski and Eno. And then that's the way it stayed over the next climb, the Col d'Allon, where Eno won there, Gwiazdowski and Simon, and they're staying pretty much together now. This is a presentation here.
Well, this is around about 184 kilometres covered. This will be the town, I presume, where General de Gaulle passed out his final years, and it's the town of Colombey. And in fact, the Tour de France once stopped here back in 1969.
Yes, and the famous meeting of Charles de Gaulle in 1960, when he came down to the end of the garden and shook hands with the leader of the Tour de France, Gaston Nencini. And he said to him then, as the tour was nearing its end, "You've gained enough time to be the winner in Paris," and indeed he was. Jean-Marie Leblanc in the centre there, the director of the Tour de France, and twice, there he is, twice a rider in this race. He was never an outstanding cyclist, but he was certainly turned out to be an extremely competent organiser. Rode for the old Bic professional team. Looking out across the beautiful countryside now, as it bounds down here. We're riding through a number of the departments of France today, from Belfort, which is in the department of Haute-Saône, which is the famous river, and then it goes on right through the Vosges, back into the Haute-Marne, and then finally into the department of the Aube. And this is where Francois Simon, who's riding here in the Bonjour colours, he comes from there, and that's why he's on the attack today.
This is the monument to General de Gaulle, the man who led France and was president for many years. And he, in fact, was a great supporter of the sport of cycling, as many of the French presidents have been in the past. The last president to actually visit the Tour de France and been very visual in his support of the Tour is actually Jacques Chirac.
Yes, a number of prime ministers and presidents of France have been on the Tour de France. Chirac was a great supporter of this event. And the race is finished on the Champs-Élysées, outside of the Élysée Palace. It's been finishing there since 1975 now. And it's always finished in Paris, in fact, since its history began in 1903. But to finish on the actual famous road of the Champs-Élysées is very special to the Tour. And I don't think it'll ever choose to finish anywhere else again. Back up with the three front runners now, as they continue to course their way, hopefully towards Troyes, without being interfered with by anybody else. In the Crédit Agricole colours and the green shorts here, Sébastien Hinault. Famous name, but no relation to Bernard Hinault, who won the Tour de France 5 times. Francois Simon knows these roads as well as anybody because he lives in this region. He's on the front in the blue. And Gregory Gwiazdowski from La Française des Jeux at the back here. He's won himself a classic, and that really... Hello and welcome back to our coverage here on our extended programme, Tour Plus, of this year's Tour de France, and this is the final weekend of the race. But it's not an easy one for the riders at all. They're coming away from Belfort today, a massive ride, 256.5 kilometres to here in Troyes. And I wonder if the sprinter Eric Zabel can finally do that green jersey justice and get himself a stage win. He hasn't won a stage of the Tour de France since 1997. But you know, everyone is still talking about that great time trial yesterday of Lance Armstrong. He really did prove to us then he was the strongest man in this year's Tour. It brought together two of the world's best in a head-to-head, which to Armstrong was a point of honour, and to Ulrich a chance to show his fans just how good he really was. As the kilometres ticked away, the two champions were split by never more than 30 seconds. But it was Armstrong who was on the ride of his life. We are watching probably the second fastest time trial in the history of the Tour de France. Armstrong sprinting the long straight here in Mulhouse. This will confirm him as winner of the Tour de France as well, and as winner of a stage of the time trial this year. Armstrong rocks and rolls his way home here now as he comes up to the line. His time is 1:5:01. He wins the time trial, and look at the speed, 53.9 kilometers an hour. That is the second fastest time trial ever seen.
Like last year, I thought it was important that the yellow jersey do a good ride, do a respectable ride, and show the, maybe show the race and show the world that he is the strongest man.
And there's no longer any doubt as to the winner in Paris tomorrow. Lance Armstrong leads Jan Ullrich by 6 minutes 2 seconds, and Yoshiba Belocchi holds on to third, 30 seconds ahead of teammate and now best Frenchman Christophe Moreau. David Miller, who finished 7th in the time trial yesterday, is 63rd and looking forward to Paris. The rollout today from Belfort beneath a clear sky and no serious mountains on the long road to Troyes. In fact, Paul, it looks a really nice day.
Excellent racing conditions, Phil. Sunny all the way here to Troyes. 15 to 20 kilometers an hour winds, though. That might make it difficult on the run-in, and a high temperature at 27 degrees Celsius.
Thanks, Paul. One man hoping to lead the Tour with a win in these next 2 days is the Aussie sprinter Robbie McEwen. And here he is talking to us on the rollout this morning.
Here we are on the second last day. Beautiful weather, summer's finally arrived in France. 2 days and 400k to go. Today's 255 kilometres. So yeah, probably another breakaway. They haven't started yet, we're already gone through kilometre 0, but there's been no attacks yet. So maybe there's a little bit of sense coming into the bunch, but probably won't be long. I guess tomorrow is going to be the only sprint, so you're going to have to wait until then. See you then.
Good on you, Robbie. This is the Lanterne Rouge of the Tour de France now, Olivier Perraudot. He's 3 hours 46 minutes behind Lance Armstrong, so I don't think he'll bother attacking him today. At the first sprint of a long day at Fontaine-les-Luxembourg, after 52 kilometres, Robbie McEwen was warm.
Who've had on the whole of the Tour de France a chiropractor, and the chiropractor looks after every bike rider each night, although they do have 4 masseurs and 4 mechanics. The chiropractor goes out and makes sure that all of these guys are in a nice alignment, and make sure that if they do get involved in any crashes, he keeps them pretty straight.
Number 2 there's Frankie Andreu, selected or joined the Tour de France for the short list for the Sydney Olympic Games for the USA. That'll be named in the early days of August, and I'm sure, judging by the way he's been riding here, then one hopes he'll make the team for Sydney as well.
Well, the United States have to pick 5 riders for that team. 5 riders will represent the US for the Olympics in Sydney. One man has already got a guaranteed place, and that's Antonio de la Cruz. He won one of the qualifying events in the United States, and I'm pretty sure that the second man who is almost certain to qualify is going to be Lance Armstrong. The next 3 places are going to be pretty difficult to choose, because there's some good performances being posted here at the Tour de France by most of the Americans. And I would be surprised if Freddie Rodriguez didn't make it into the team, because although he doesn't ride on the same team as Lance Armstrong, he certainly has proved to be a very good sprinter, and he's going to complete his first Tour de France this year.
With credibility, and you know, being such a good sprinter, he could well take on Robbie McEwen and Eric Zabel either today or tomorrow, and maybe even get his first stage win. This is the breakaway for the first time since they escaped. It's now over 3 minutes for Vino, Gwiazdowski and Francois Simon, the youngest of the 4 famous cycling brothers. He's the only one left racing as we course our way in towards his home department of the Aube.
Interestingly enough, he's the only one of the 3 brothers that hasn't won a stage, but then on the other hand, he's the only one of the 3 brothers who has been the French national champion, a title which he took last year, and he was hoping to try and get himself that stage victory, and it looked very much as if he might have gotten it on one of the stages of the Tour de France last year, Phil, but he was outwitted on the final climb by David Echavarria, one of the few riders from the Once squad who had to abandon this year, which is a bit of a surprise because he took out 2 stage victories last year. The 3 leaders now in the town where General de Gaulle passed out his final days after he retired as the President of France, and strangely enough, there were 1 or 2 American flags creeping into the fold today.
Not surprisingly, because they're about to have a weekend of American domination of the Tour de France, as they did last year. Nobody's going to attack Lance Armstrong anymore in this year's race. No point now, a gap of 6 minutes can't be recuperated. Lance will watch all of the riders nearest to him, Jan Ullrich, Yoshiba Belocchi, Christophe Moreau and Roberto Heras. And after those boys, well, it's more than 12 minutes back to the next man, so he needn't watch too many anymore. Massive crowds again to the villages of France. Anything the Germans can do, the French can match, it seems, here, because this is a big turnout on what is a beautiful day. The wind is fairly strong, and it's coming slightly cross to the riders throughout the way. We're gently rising north of the westerly direction up towards Troyes, and when we get to the finish, we're about 170 kilometres away from Paris itself, and those kilometres done in the luxury of a train.
Well, in fact, a pretty special train as well, because in the past the riders have always had the transfer done on the TGV, the Train Grande Vitesse, the French train that speeds along at 180 miles an hour. Well, they won't be doing that tomorrow, because for the first time, in fact, the Tour de France is going to take the Orient Express to take the bike riders up to Paris, and that's a pretty cool experience, I would say, for most of these guys, because I would say it has to be the most famous train in the world.
Yes, it is, but I hope they don't start dishing out the champagne before the last stage of the Tour de France on the Orient Express. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, I'm sure, will be on board.
Yes, but you might not recognise him, because he usually travels disguised when he travels on that.
So the sky is a little bit of cloud up there now. In fact, it's gone a little bit overcast towards the finishing line, but it's still very warm. These three riders, I think, if they're going to stay away, because we're looking here at still just inside 70 kilometres to go, they're going to need, I think, quite a lead, maybe 4 to 5 minutes to survive.
Well, you can see the main field now about to pass under the shadow of that monument to the General de Gaulle, and still it's the United States Postal Service team on the front. These guys actually said to me last night, Phil, they said, you know, we're ready to work again if we need to, and they were just bearing in mind that there was always the possibility of a last attack coming from Jan Ullrich. And in fact, Ullrich was involved in one of the earlier skirmishes of the day, when a group of about 16 or 17 riders got off the front of the bunch. But I think he decided that actually going back to the main field was the most sensible decision for him, because he was quite happy, I think, now to finish this Tour de France in second place, and he reckoned that a long raid on the penultimate stage would probably come to nothing.
Well, he was reasonably pleased with his ride yesterday in the title. I'd say very pleased, in fact. Only Armstrong beat him by 25 seconds. But with the time checks as they were, once Armstrong got his lead, they both rode the course at the same speed. He never improved on the time gap all the way to the finish. Ullrich was very, very pleased, but he had one regret, and that was he couldn't show all the fans who'd come out to see him winning the stage of the Tour. But he came up against a guy just that little bit quicker than him, and certainly with the fastest time trial over that distance ever ridden in a Tour de France, I think Armstrong left his message pretty clearly written on the road.
Armstrong psychologically really wanted to go out and win that time trial, because he actually said to me last night, Phil, that if he hadn't won the time trial, people would have asked questions about his superiority, because he was left behind on the Col de Jouplan by Jan Ullrich. And he felt that if he was beaten in the final time trial as well, people would always discuss as to whether or not Armstrong was weakening in the final week of the Tour de France and maybe was not a worthy winner. And I think by stamping his authority all over that time trial, he's stopped the tongues wagging.
Well, he's certainly done that, and now he's got the benefit of having all 8 members of his team around him, and none of the other teams can claim that. A lot of the heads of the teams have already gone back home. It's amazing how many leaders have abandoned this year. Alex Zuller, leader of the Banesto team. Michele Bartoli, leader of Mappe. Today we saw Michael Bogert go. He's the leader of Rabobank in that crash. Also gone is Marco Pantani, leader of Mercatoni Uno. Jan Kirsipuu, AG2R. Laurent Dufaux, the leader of Seiko. Sergei Ivanov never even got to start because of that high blood count reading for Farm Freaks. Frank Vandenbroek, we never saw him until he was on the train home for Cofidis. Rick Verbruggen, he went out for Lotto. Stefan Erlo, he went out for the Française des Jeux. And it's amazing, Paul, how many race leaders have left the Tour this year.
It is absolutely remarkable. All the big names came to the Tour de France ready to take on Lance Armstrong, including this man at the back here, number 15. That's Jose Maria Jimenez, where I was expecting a big challenge to come from him and from the other Banesto lead.
He was a surprise at the time, and he hasn't done much since, but he is a strong bike rider.
Certainly is a very good bike rider. The man with the biggest name, really, the biggest ticket on his shoulders, is the man in the dark blue jersey there, Jérôme Simon. He's the youngest of 4 cycling brothers. and I raced with two of them, Jérôme and Régis, both winners of a stage of the Tour de France, as was the elder brother Pascal. He won the stage into Orcières-les-Merlettes, but he also was made more famous by the fact that he wore the yellow jersey and actually had to abandon because of a broken shoulder blade.
Yes, that was a very sad occasion, and I remember that only too well. He suffered on for a long time with that pain until he got to the mountains, and he certainly couldn't climb the mountains with a problem like that. The American US Postal Services team, the only team of 20, bringing all 9 riders towards Paris. And in the red top jersey, their champion of Luxembourg, Joaquin Benoit Joachim, has Lance Armstrong on the right here, the leader, and what a leader of the Tour now, over 6 minutes advantage over the second rider. So he isn't going to worry too much about the boys up front. And the gap, if anything, has come down slightly now, Paul.
Well, they've got control of this breakaway group right here. You know, those 3 riders in front, Phil, have still got an awful long way to go. Around about 45 miles of racing to the finish. And I get the feeling 1 or 2 of the teams today would like to try and pull them back into the fold. Obviously, the Farm Frites team from Holland, they think Robbie McEwen's got a great chance of taking out victory. And in fact, his wife has made the transfer down here to watch the finish of this stage. And I wonder if that is an omen for the little Australian sprinter. But certainly one man chasing the stage victory is the man who leads the King of the Sprints competition, the green jersey competition. He's going to take that title out for the 5th year in succession, Eric Zabel. He got so close a couple of days ago in Lausanne, and this is a very tough stage, and it might suit him, but maybe he'll try and hold something back to try and win the final stage on the Champs-Élysées.
He's certainly looking that way. There's his team all around him, and they're the boys in the pink tops of Telecom. They've had 2 glorious days with the race passing through Germany because of the support that the Telecom team have had in Germany. Over the 2 days of racing from Switzerland into Germany and back into France, there were 2 million spectators on the roadside, and they really have been entertained by these bike riders. Lance Armstrong, there he is, now riding coolly towards Paris, having won a stage now, the time trial, and looking like he's going to finish up with a victory margin of over 6 minutes over Ulrich. In fact, there's only 27 riders of the 128 still in who are within 1 hour of Lance Armstrong overall, which gives you some idea of how strong he has been this year.
I think yesterday's time trial result as well just showed exactly how strong the difference was between Lance Armstrong and Jan Ullrich and the rest of the field. Those 2 riders fairly close together in that time trial, but Christophe Moreau, who put in a good performance as well, Phil, losing more than 2 minutes. It gives you an idea just how much more superiority Armstrong and Ullrich have in the time trial.
Oh, absolutely, and they're going to come head-to-head in the Olympic Games, where they're also going to meet up with Stuart O'Grady, who was in this Tour early on and went out with a broken collarbone. He's getting himself back in shape now for the Olympic Games time trial, so he'll see a lot more of the Tour de France boys when they go to Sydney in September. All of the US Postal boys here looking very cool. Paul Sheeran remarking to me this morning that he was with the team at their hotel last night, and he thought they all looked very relaxed and very fresh and not really suffering at all.
I think they're suffering, but they are doing well and recovering exceptionally well. An interesting thing that I did notice, that the team has a huge entourage, and they're probably the first team that I can think of